Okay. So, sounds good. Here we are for another live stream, and if you are watching the replay, we are here every Thursday, so you can tune in. This is California time, so around this time every week, more or less. Sometimes we start a little earlier, sometimes we start a little later, but it's every Thursday. So to start, let's bring up some recent comments until we get some people in the chat. And my new video is doing quite well, it seems. I'm talking about 3 things you need if you want to sound American. Let's see, we got some good comments, blah, 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 okay. Any good questions that stand out? I released a video recently about the ear trainer software, which you should be able to find a link to in the description if you haven't heard about that yet. We talked about thought chunking recently this week, and an exercise to help practice that. Let's see. Yeah, so Finn had a question. I don't know if Finn will be joining us today. Hopefully, that'd be nice. I don't want to answer this now in case he shows up later. So we'll put that on hold. It's a good question. So people want some more chunking videos. It's good. Okay, so one thing I can talk about here to start off is there's this concept of what I call, at least, like the breath or the air, the flow of air. American English is a language that we really breathe through. Hello, Gabriel. Welcome to the chat. Thank you for stopping by today. How are you? But as I was saying, American English sort of breathes through their sounds. So what that means, you don't want to sound breathy, right? Like, if I'm sound breathy, then I'm going to be talking like this, where there's way too much air. Okay, so you don't want to do that. And especially with the stop sounds, this is a very, very important detail. But there are some languages, especially with the stop sounds, for example, P, right, where P is just like, right? There's not really any air force. It's literally just like the lips. And it's like, I think a lot of people from the Philippines have this type of sound because they'll say the Philippines. Right? I'm from the Philippines, and there's not really any breath, right? Where even the weak P in English, we don't want to have as much breath, but there's still a little bit of flow there, like happy, happy, happy. It's not happy, happy. It's happy. It's a little tiny bit of flow, and then in the strong P, it's p, 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 right? Pick it up, pick it up. So, especially if your language doesn't use a lot of air force or flow of your breath through the sounds, and this also includes the vowel sounds as well, then that's something that you want to be aware of. And I'm going to make a lesson about that in the near future. Gabriel, I'm good. I was just studying some phrasal verbs. Ooh, yeah, good luck. I hope you have the logic of prepositions, because that's really the key to mastering the phrasal verbs. In my opinion, after I discovered the logic of the prepositions, my opinion is that trying to study phrasal verbs without understanding the logic is almost pointless. Like it's just going to be very painful and very slow and very clumsy, especially because a lot of phrasal verbs have multiple meanings, where if you feel the preposition first, then you'll actually start to use some phrasal verbs spontaneously that you haven't even heard before. So I really need some luck. I just came across one with 6 synonyms. Yeah, that happens. That happens. It's also very common for a phrasal verb to replace a non-phrasal verb. So, like, I always like to use explode as an example, um, because, like, so in Spanish, for example, this is like explotar, right? And they might have other words to say that, but explotar. Um, and that's fine, right? We say, okay, the car exploded. Okay, whatever. And that's perfectly fine. We use that, right? But we prefer to use blow up, right? Which has other meanings too. And there's a reason why it has other meanings, or other usages, I guess. So it can mean explode, as in, right? The car blew up. But we can also blow up a tire, not meaning explode, but like to put air into it so that now it is firm. Or same thing with a balloon. You can blow up a balloon, meaning explode, but just fill it with air, right? Um, you can even use blow up to say like, which I know this isn't the most politically correct thing, but we're here to learn English. We're exploring things. Some people will use blow up to mean that somebody got fat, right? So if you see somebody and they're not fat, and then you see them again, say a year later, and they gained a lot of weight, you can say, "Wow, you really blew up," right? Because they got bigger. Um, so just that idea between blow and up, especially the up part, can be applied in a couple different ways, right? And if you don't understand up, you don't know the logic and the feeling of up, then you're basically just going to have to try to memorize all of these different meanings of blow up, which isn't really going to help you all that much anyway. You need to feel it. You need to feel it. I am going to write a book about verbs using the same approach that I did for the prepositions, for like probably the 15 most common verbs or something. I want to do more than that, but the logic of prepositions has 17 prepositions, and it took me like 7 months to write that book. So I don't want to spend like a year or 2 years like trying to write a book about verbs. So it'll probably be like the 15 most common verbs or something like that. And then it'll still give you a lot, right? Because they're the most common verbs. You're going to see them everywhere. And I'll probably include like some combinations with phrasal verbs to show like, okay, the logic of the preposition plus the logic of this verb, of course, can make this meaning, and it makes perfect sense. So look out for that in the future. I need to finish the pronunciation course first, but I don't know when I'm going to actually write that book. It will come though at some point. So, but glad to see that you're putting effort into your English, Gabriel. That's always good. Good sign. And actually, this is sort of a late branding mistake decision that I'm going to be making. So on my whole thing, it's English hacks and it's think like a native, learn English better. And there's a particular reason why I put it that way, but recently I was thinking that it actually might be a bit better because it also fits the pronunciation part of it too. That the think like a native doesn't really fit the pronunciation part. Um, but I think it might be better instead of think like a native, it should be something more like feel English like a native. Because that's really what we're trying to get at. And I think it's also technically a little bit more accurate than think like a native. But yeah, so you might see a little change in my um, thing when I show that. You see my little subtitle logo thing. I'm nowhere near. Okay. Delio Hector. Um, welcome to the chat. Nowhere near what? I don't know. I'm so confused. Is that something I said? Because we don't. I don't pay attention to the things I say. I just use the language. So if I said that, maybe you have a question about that. I'm nowhere near. Yeah, because I think I said like I'm nowhere near uh, ready to write that book or something like that. Um, so Hector, I'll just say Hector. If that's a question, please clarify so I know exactly what's going on and what your question is. I was correcting something on my message up there. Oh, I didn't see a message from you. Okay, interesting. So maybe repost that first message because I do not see anything else from you aside from I'm nowhere near and the message you just sent about correcting something. Sometimes the YouTube system is a little weird. If you try to post something that is too long, maybe it'll go through for you, but it's not actually going to post it. So I don't know, maybe break it into smaller pieces or something, but try to send that again, and then send a message saying that you sent it again, and I'll tell you if I see it. Um, I really hate that YouTube has stupid little things like that. But Gabriel, there's also put on weight when I hear that I imagine someone wearing a skin suit made out of fat. Okay. Okay, so yeah, when I hear that, I imagine someone wearing a skin suit. Oh, that's a good point. I want to talk a bit about that, but I just realized something with like the way that I was kind of reading it the first way. Intonation and chunking can actually completely change the meaning of something. We'll talk a little bit about that, but interesting. It's an interesting way to visualize it. So it's like you're putting on a fat suit, sort of, right? Like, okay. Um, and kind of, I mean, obviously you're not literally putting on a suit of fat, but it's kind of the same effect, right? Because the weight, we say the weight goes on your body. Even though technically it's inside, we think of weight as being on your body, not externally, but it's sort of like with the clothes, right? Technically, your body is inside the clothes, but we usually say like, I have a shirt on, right? Because it's on my body. So it's kind of similar. It's like the fat, say if you have like fat on your arms here, you could say the fat is hanging off my arms or whatever. Um, so it's a similar perspective, how we look at it. I've read a book about prepositions by a famous teacher. His book was nowhere near yours, or you're way better. Oh, interesting. Okay, I don't know any famous English teachers except maybe I think AJ Hogue, and of course Rachel's English. Everybody knows Rachel's English if you're in this space. um, and I only know AJ Hogue because one of my students asked me about him before, but I don't really know many other teachers. So, okay, well, good. I'm glad my book is better. um, I mean, at the end of the day, whatever helps, right? Whatever works. Some people don't like my approach, so if another teacher is better for you, great. As long as you can learn, as long as it's better, or as long as it's better for you, that's perfectly fine. But in this case, my way is better for you, so good. Very glad. Can you explain again that SKS SPS thing? I got the STS, but I'm really struggling to understand how to do the SKS and SPS. Okay, so yeah, this is normal, especially depending on what your native language is. It can be quite difficult. For me as a native, I'm thinking like, oh, this is so easy, but I know it's not. I know it's not. So let me get a drink of tea here. Um, for the P, I think is really the easiest one. You have to have a little bit finer control of your lips, but you don't really have to worry about like what the tongue is doing with the S and the K and the S, right? So there's the S and the P, so you're using two parts of your mouth at the same time. That could be kind of a hard part, but you want to not completely close your lips into the P, right? And again, you always can. It's possible to do it. If I say wasps, that's okay. It's clearly enunciated. But when we're speaking more quickly or a little more lazily, what we'll often do is instead of closing fully into the P and then releasing it back into the S, you're going to move toward the P with your lips. Okay, so for example, I'll type the word I'm saying, wasps. Right, a wasp is a type of insect, kind of similar to a bee, and it can sting you. And okay, so a wasp. Plural is wasps, right? So if I don't completely close my lips, wasps. See, closed, wasp. I can't push anything out. Wasp. I have to open my lips. Wasp. See, you still hear that sound coming through. You don't want to stop the sound. If you're closing it to the point where the sound stops, then you're not doing this transition right. Okay. Wasps. Wasps. That's all it is. Okay, so you're just moving toward what would be a P, but you're not completely closing it. You're not actually doing a full P sound. Okay, that's all it is. It creates the illusion of the P. Same thing with the K, except now, instead of the lips, you're using the back of the tongue, because that's where the K is, back here. Okay, so now, ask. You can, if you want, you can let the front of the tongue come out of the way if it's a little easier for you, as long as you go right back into the S. But I think it's probably the easiest to just try to get some independent tongue control between the front and the back, because what I can do quite easily is I'll just hold the S position where it is, and it's one solid breath. Okay, so I'm doing an S. I don't move the front of my tongue, right? It can move, but to make it simple, we'll say it doesn't move because you don't have to move it. So we'll do the S there. You hold that S, and then as you're doing that S, you're going to bring the back of the tongue up without moving the front part. Okay, keep the front part exactly where it is. You're going to bring the back up, but don't close completely. Okay, you want to get close to closing to where there's just a little bit of space. Or it could even be not even that much. It could be just like a little motion with the back of the tongue. But to make it simple, we'll say you get close without actually closing, all in one breath. So the S is constantly going, right? That breath is constantly going through that S shape, but the back of the tongue comes up, doesn't close, and goes back down. And that will create the illusion of sort of like a light K or a half K sound, right? So if I say, for example, asks, okay, fully enunciated, there's a K. Asks, asks, okay, and you can do that. But the faster, lazier, somewhat easier way would be like I just described. Asks. Okay, so I'm holding that S, and then I'm just, as I hold it, I'm just bringing the back of the tongue up and then putting it back down. As all one breath. Okay. And as I probably explained before, instead of doing it in one breath, you can sort of modulate the breath and sort of like let it kind of drop a second and then push it back out into the S. That's maybe a little bit more complicated way to do it, but that's another way that we will do it as well. The result is basically the same, but you do need a little bit of that motion toward the K, even if you drop the breath a little bit. Because otherwise there won't be the illusion of the K, right? If I just say S, S, if anything, that may sound like an ST sort of, because the S and the T are so close to each other. But yeah. Okay, so I hope that clarifies things for you, Steve. I know you've been working on this for a couple weeks now, but any other questions related to it, let me know. It's fine. I know it can be difficult, but hopefully that solves your problem. Okay, Hector. I've never sat down to study phrasal verbs. I guess I was lucky in the sense that I just picked them up through immersion, or maybe that's the best way to study them. But hey, teach their own. Plus, I know where. Yeah, so I'm okay, and then that's what you corrected. I am nowhere near done mastering all phrasal verbs. I've reposted the message. Snap, I reposted the message with the same mistake. Well, I noticed that, yeah. That's okay. Hello, Sedent. Welcome to the chat. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope all is well. But for Hector, yeah, so yeah, you can pick up phrasal verbs through immersion. You definitely can. You can pick up everything through immersion. You could, it's at the end of the day, it's time on task, right? Like if you think of, obviously, babies and young children, their brains are a bit different. Yes, it's not 100% the same, but a lot of the same principles apply, right? Like you need a lot of input, you need to practice a lot. Um, Children don't necessarily have to practice a lot. That's one of their little shortcuts. But in terms of input, you still need a lot of input as an adult. Like that doesn't change between children and adults. But if you think about, say, even though they have that sort of brain advantage of, being able to maybe better absorb the language and the pronunciation and everything, they still spend, like in your native language, you spent hours upon hours, like, hundreds of hours, thousands of hours in your first, say, 4 or 5 years, you know, just so many hours listening to the language around you. And it's not like you were sitting there as a baby consciously trying to, oh, what do I hear? No, it's, they don't have to do that because we have the natural um, ability to kind of start figuring things out and absorbing it from around us since we speak language. But they do get that input, right? And I forget, there was like one child who they were like isolated for I think it was like their first like 7 or 8 years of life or something like that. And when they found this child, so they grew up with no language. Like there was nobody around them to talk. They were like a wild person basically, because they got like separated from their family. I don't remember the details, but they grew up in the wild basically. And that person was not really able to develop language after that, which is an interesting point. But that aside, right, they got no input. And so the normally babies and young children, they get so many hours of constant exposure to their own language, um, where we adults, even if you sit for, an hour a day listening to something, which is great, it's fantastic. That's actually what Steve Kaufman does. He's a polyglot. He only has about an hour a day and he mostly focuses on listening a lot. And then later he'll do speaking once his listening is really good. So that is sufficient depending on what you're going to do and how much time you have, if you want to take his approach, which is a little slow, but that's fine. Um, but you sit down for like an hour a day, um, and it's actually not even that because he really focuses on the actual listening. If you're taking classes, right? Like if you grow up, say in your home country and they're teaching you English, a lot of rule based, not so much listening, not so much speaking, right? You don't actually get a whole lot of real input of English as it's actually spoken. You just get a bunch of rules and like maybe some audio recordings. And so most of your hours that you spend with the language are reading and 5 years, 10 years, and still not really speak the language very well because you didn't have a lot of actual real input of the language. Um, so eventually, pretty much everything in the language, even articles, can be learned through immersion. Um, a big part of what I want to do in my approach, like with the logic of prepositions, is to make that process faster and easier. Um, and that's part of why I call the channel English Hacks, because you're literally hacking the language, the personality of the language, because every language has its own personality, um, in order to sort of get directly to the feeling instead of having to take all of this time to build it up. It still does take some time, it still does take some practice, but based on the results I've got from the students that I tested that idea with, um, their ability to use the prepositions and even phrasal verbs that they had never heard before just went through the roof. Um, so it definitely is something that works. But anyway, yeah. But you say to each their own, definitely, 100%. Not everybody likes this person's approach or that person's approach. That's actually a big part of, well, not a big part, but that's part of the reason why I wrote one of my other books, How to Learn a Language. And the subtitle is Building Your Path to Fluency, because that's literally what it is you're building your own path, because you have, say, Benny Lewis speak from day one, and fluent in 3 months on one side, and then you have Steve Kaufman, which is listening, reading, listening, reading, listening, reading for like 8 to 10 months, and then he'll start speaking. They're like polar opposites, and yet they're both polyglots. Both approaches work, and then you have people in between and all kinds of things. Luca Lampariello, Idausa Ness. Luca and Idausa both have a very high focus on pronunciation first, especially Idausa. You have I don't know if some of these people are still in the game, but when I was studying Spanish, it was like Jada Fadness. I can't think of these names. Ollie Richards, except there's so many of them, and they all have a lot of them have like some similar ideas and some similar things, but some of them, like as I said, like Benny and Steve, seem to be almost like complete polar opposites in very many ways, and yet it works. So whenever you're learning a skill, everything works, but not everything works for everybody. Everything works, but not everything works for everybody. Because sometimes, like for example, some polyglots, they like to use flashcards. Other polyglots hate using flashcards and they don't use them. So you can say, well, flashcards are the best way to learn vocabulary. That might be true if you enjoyed using them. If you hate using them, they're not the best way, even if scientifically they might be best for the brain or whatever. If you hate using them, you're not going to be motivated and you're not going to use them. So what works is what works best for you. Um, there are some things that are objectively maybe more efficient and better than other things, but if you don't like it and it doesn't work for you, then it's worthless. Sedent. I heard a polyglot speaking Hindi. Seems like they don't care about accents. Well, if you heard not all polyglots care about accents. Polyglot just means that you speak multiple languages. It doesn't mean you speak multiple languages perfect or with a native like accent. It just means that you can communicate effectively in that language, right? So yeah, like I think Steve Kaufman, for example, he he seems to still develop pretty good pronunciation, but he doesn't really focus too much on that. Like he wants to be understood, and that's really like his goal. But outside of that, like he doesn't care if it's 100% perfect. Or someone like Idausa Ness, as well as myself, him and I've never actually met him, but I think him and I would get along pretty well with this. Because we've actually had like some similar ideas, like the idea of micro adjustments. I developed that idea by myself, and then when I discovered him, he used the exact same term, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! I love this guy." Um, but anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, but people like Idaus and Ness, they really like getting their tongue to make those sounds and um, exploring the sound system and all that stuff. And not all polyglots care about that. Not everybody cares. So Idaus and Ness likes to try to have a perfect accent to fool a native. Steve Kaufman, who cares, right? As long as they can understand me, that's fine. And that's okay too. You learn in English. You don't have to have a perfect pronunciation, a perfect accent. The main goal is to be understood. But if you do want to have a perfect pronunciation or a native like accent, it's possible. It can take a lot of work, but it's possible for most people, I think. Um, Gabriel, talking about that, do you think someone takes after their parents' intelligence, or it's all about environment and people that you're surrounded with? Interesting. So this is essentially nature versus nurture, right? The whole classical philosophical question. And I was talking about specifically in language and stuff. And you say parents' intelligence, so I assume this question is maybe a little bit broader than just language. But my, which I could be completely wrong. I always admit I could be wrong, but my perspective on this, which I've thought a lot about this, having like I have a degree in philosophy, so these are the kinds of things that I like to think about. I think that a lot of what people do just in a general sense. I mean, obviously there's basic survival stuff, right? And that's fine, but that's part of the nature part. There's like a seed of nature that goes back, millions of years through our evolution, all the way back to the lizard brain and keeping yourself alive and all that stuff. But um, and there's some other things on top of that that come with the mammalian brain and certain uh, emotions and this and that, whatever. But I do think that a lot of the how do I say this? There's a lot of effect from the environment, like a lot. Like that determines if I had to put a number on it, which I mean it's probably variable, it depends a bit, but I would say at least like 60 to 70%, maybe even up to 80% is environment. Um, so and one classic example is, like you might have somebody who, they grew up really poor, but then uh and like really poor in like a bad household, with like abuse and violence and all this stuff, and they grow up to be a perfectly fine person. A lot of people, they get stuck in that cycle, unfortunately, and they'll just perpetuate it, keep it going with like the next generation, which is horrible. But some people can actually come up out of that. So even though they had that particular environment, maybe they had either something within themselves, and or some other environmental influence like a mentor or a teacher or something that was kind of able to guide them out of that, and they end up becoming successful, fine, emotionally stable, all this stuff. And on the other hand, you have people who maybe grew up in like a really wealthy, good, positive household. They had everything they needed, and then as an adult, like they sort of fell out of that into addictions and all these other things. And so um, I do think that environmental factors can have a big influence, regardless of like your starting point. It's a big complicated thing. That's not really what we're here for. um, but specifically for language, obviously we know that a young child will absorb the language around them, um, even if that's sign language, right? Like if they're deaf and you know sign language, you start signing to them, and you learn, you express yourself like that through them. They will learn how to do that. And I'm not an expert in how sign language is acquired by young children or anything like that, but I know that it's actually a similar process in the brain that happens. It's just visual instead of auditory. So it's really interesting. But anyway, any other English questions, guys? Or I guess general questions, but English preferred. See if I have other comments here. So earlier, we don't have anything else here. YouTube is asking if I want to block this. God, YouTube is so PC. I'll go ahead and show this. Like, I don't even know why that would be caught by the filter. Well, I mean, I know why, but it's stupid. It just doesn't really make sense. So the last time I checked, the lowest IQ country, not county. County is a smaller place within a state. It's not a city. Like a city is in a county. A county is in a state. A country rate was from a place in Africa. I was wondering if an American family adopted a kid would be smart and dumb. Well, see, that is it's, as I said, it's very complicated. But we also know now that IQ is it's not like the score of intelligence. There's many different kinds of intelligence. And I don't know if that's true. If okay, there's a particular place in Africa that has like the lowest IQ, or whatever. Whether or not that's true, number one, I don't think it particularly matters, because like IQ isn't everything, right? Like if that were true, then being a genius would mean that like you should get everything. Like society should hold you up on a pedestal, and if if your IQ is below a certain point, like you're useless to society, and that wouldn't make any sense. Like you should just be thrown away. No, like that would be stupid. Um, Everybody has a certain inherent value in my view. So but there's emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and then we can even talk about like within specific spheres, linguistic intelligence, musical intelligence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of different intelligences, and IQ, intelligence quotient, which is what it means. That's really just sort of like logical, analytical type intelligence. Um, I could be a bit wrong about that, but that's how I always thought about it. I don't know if that's actually a separate thing, but um, so it really doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't matter if somebody has a high IQ or low IQ. Like there's other forms of intelligence, and if somebody does have, say, a lower IQ, they're probably going to have maybe a higher EQ, emotional quotient, of emotional intelligence, or whatever. So yeah, like me, I have like zero mechanical intelligence. That's what I call it. I don't know if that's what it was called, but anything to do with like mechanical stuff, like even left and right. If I'm driving, it's very, very clear to my brain, because I'm in a car and I know left turn, right turn because there's a steering wheel here. But even to this day, when people say like, "Oh, it's to your left," sometimes I'll look to my right, which might make me seem extremely stupid. But when I was a kid, I didn't know left from right. I was like 8 years old. I remember this. I was 8 years old, um, and I was having difficulty remembering left and right. And so the way that I remembered it, and I used this for years and years and years. Sometimes I even still have to use it, where our dishes, right? We had the kitchen sink, and the dirty dishes were on the left, the clean dishes were on the right. And I had to use that. I had to visualize, like if somebody said, raise your right hand, I had to visualize, okay, dirty dishes on the right, raise my right hand. um, and so I have a friend who he was in the Marines for a while actually, and he was like a mechanic and he was doing a lot of mechanical things and all this stuff and he likes that, and we jokingly, we don't, it's not a serious thing, we jokingly say like he's the dumb one of the group because a lot of us are like quite like linguistically intelligent or mathematically intelligent. I'm not very mathematically intelligent, but many of my friends are. Um, but when it comes to mechanical things, like we'll do these like mechanical puzzles online and stuff where you have to like move this here and then move that there and like in order to get the puzzle to be solved. And it takes me like 5 to 10 times longer. He could just go dot 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 dot. He sees it, he does it. He's like super smart for that. But me, I'm so slow, right? And it's something I could improve and I can practice. But if it's something mechanical, I am naturally dumb, right? So I think dumb is relative. Like I would also say I'm probably emotionally dumb because, getting a little bit personal for a second, I have trouble processing emotions. Um, that's just something that I do. But on the other hand, when it comes to logic and, exploring like philosophy and the nature of reality and things like that, like my brain loves doing that and I love exploring that and I love, thinking about things like that. And so, I would probably have more higher intelligence there. But my emotional intelligence, my mechanical intelligence would actually be pretty low. So it's all very relative. Um, in Guinea. Okay, whatever. I don't think it matters. I hope it's not my country. Oh, okay, so actors from Africa. Well, good. I don't think, at least as far as I know, maybe somebody has said that they're from Africa, but I think you might be the first person uh, that I know is from Africa watching my channel. So good representation. Very nice. We want to have as many countries as possible coming to the English Hacks way. Yes, very good, very good. So anyway, um, Yeah. So, unless there's anything else related to that, people are coming here to watch English. I forget what I titled it, but it's something about like learn English. And people tune in and they're like, "Why is this guy talking about IQ and emotional intelligence and all this stuff?" Um, so anyway, uh, earlier I had started talking about oh, not my country then. I'm from Mozambique. We speak Portuguese here. Oh, yeah, yeah. Portuguese, interesting. Along with 20 something. Yeah, no, Africa is. I mean, probably not like every single country in Africa. I know Egypt is in Africa. They primarily speak like Arabic or whatever. But I hear that a lot of places in Africa are very linguistically diverse because right there's lots of tribes and this and that, and obviously there's Western influence and English, of course, is a big one. So that's cool. Mozambique. I didn't know you spoke Portuguese there, though. Obviously, for unfortunate historical reasons, there's Spanish influence, Portuguese influence, English influence. I know that there's a country in Africa that speaks Spanish. I learned that through my study of Spanish that I didn't know about Portuguese. So that's interesting. And also French, of course. French is another language spoken in Africa, another Western language. But I think also there's in Venezuela. Is it Venezuela? I want to say Venezuela. Yeah, there's like a little part of Venezuela that speaks Dutch, and it might actually be Brazil. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it's Venezuela. That they actually speak Dutch because there was like a little Dutch colony or something like that, and so it's I mean, obviously the history and colonization stuff that's horrible that you know things happened, but the fact that there's a primarily Spanish speaking country, and then there's this little Dutch community. It's like that's cool. There's this people speaking Dutch instead of Spanish. So it's interesting. Um, Maxim from Ukraine. Yay, Ukraine. Most people here speak both Ukrainian and Russian. Yeah, I hear that. I've had a couple of Ukrainian students, and they all tell me that, well, not all of them, but most of them, because some of them just speak Russian. Like maybe they were like they grew up in Ukraine or that like they were born there, but then they like they moved to Russia or something earlier in their life and they just kind of speak Russian. But a lot of Ukrainians have told me that they'll either speak Ukrainian and Russian, or they'll speak Ukrainian and can understand Russian because the languages are so similar, or vice versa. Like maybe they grew up with it and so they understand Ukrainian, but they actually speak Russian more. And so yeah, it's really interesting. And if I remember right, I think because there's like Spanish and Portuguese, which are extremely close together. The pronunciation can be quite different, but the grammar, the vocabulary, they're very, very similar languages. And I'm pretty sure Ukrainian and Russian are like even more similar than Spanish and Russian or Spanish and Portuguese. So it's almost kind of like you get two languages for one. Because I can read more or less, I can read Portuguese because of the Spanish I know. So if I were to learn, say, Russian, which I do plan to do, I know Ukrainian isn't Russian. It's not exactly the same, but I would probably be able to read Ukrainian, or understand somebody speaking Ukrainian, which is always cool. It's like you get sort of almost two for one. Um, can you help me pronounce the word deliberately? Is the T pronounced? Good question. All right. Very good English question. So, and this, see, part of the reason why you guys have these questions is because like you hear natives and like maybe sometimes you'll hear like in this case sometimes maybe you hear a T, sometimes you don't, and you're like, okay, what's going on? Or maybe you go to the dictionary or you hear a teacher tells you, oh yeah, there's a T there, and you deliberately, right, or whatever it is. But then you hear natives and they don't use the T. So the reality, right, with a lot of questions like this, the reality is that the teachers aren't wrong. It's just that the teachers teach you the very clear, enunciated way to do it that natives don't always use. Um, And the way I like to put it, the full pronunciation, meaning like the clearly enunciated version of the word or particular sound in that word, is always possible, right? Even if you're not enunciating or emphasizing, it could always possibly come out. It's just not really likely if you're not, you know, clearly enunciating for a reason like emphasizing. So I could say so say I'm mad at you, like you did something on purpose, which is what deliberately means. Um, and I say you did that deliberately, deliberately. Probably going to go into the T, and there's this sort of TL combination. Um, I could maybe push the T out completely because the L is there. We don't really want to push the T out, but I could say deliberately and get it really clear. That's going to be super, super special in this case because, again, the L is sort of, it wants to be there too. And so we're probably just going to do a cluster for TL. But that's towards the clearer enunciated end. I could just say deliberately, do a stop T. Okay. And if you do a stop T, remember T is special of all the stop consonants because you can just do a glottal stop T without actually being in the T position. All the other stop sounds, you have to be in the position for the sound, but the T you don't. Okay. So now I don't have this sort of TL cluster problem where they kind of both want to happen in the same place, more or less. You could just say deliberate and then add ly, deliberately, deliberately. So most often, we're just going to stop that T because it makes it easier to speak instead of trying to do that cluster. But you could do the cluster, or maybe in a very extreme case, you could actually push the T out. But that's very, very unlikely in this particular word. Ferris, so intriguing. Africa is one of the only countries I know that speaks so many languages. It's like if you move to other state, you'd have to speak another language. It's insane for me. Other state, Africa is one of the only countries. Well, okay, so Africa would actually be. See, that's why I was confused because you're saying like countries and then state. So like that's how like we would think about it maybe like in the West or stuff. But Africa is actually the continent. And then there are countries inside that continent. So that'd be a little more accurate. That kind of threw me off. I was like, what? But yeah, no, it's definitely true. And again, obviously, there are historical reasons for that. There's lots of tribes, throughout a very long human history that have, been there and developed and all that stuff. And then there's the Western influence, which has some unfortunate backstory, but um, yeah, it becomes like this big mix of things. So that part of it, the fact that there's a lot of linguistic diversity, that is interesting and cool. So yeah, um, I think it's interesting because like we came out of Africa. I know not everybody believes in evolution and stuff. So if you're religious, that's fine, whatever. But um, yeah, bad in geography. Yeah, I'm not the best at geography either. That's okay. That's actually something that like a lot of natives would actually make that same type of mistake because our U.S. education system is horrible, and we might use the wrong words like that. But anyway, as I was saying, what was I saying? Yeah. Oh, yeah, like we came out of Africa, right? And so it's like it's literally like the home of our species. And then like after all this time, it's like one of the most linguistically diverse places is that continent. So it's like because our species has been there for so long, and then of course, unfortunate historical things that happen like colonization. But through all that long history, it's like I think that's why there's so much linguistic diversity there because our species has been there literally since the beginning. So it's really cool. But pronouncing the T makes it much harder. Yes, it does, indeliberately. I know that as a continent, but I would make good catch. I would make the same mistake. Yeah, I know because like I don't know. We don't usually think in terms of continents. Like continents are really big things. Like we think of countries and maybe even states. And so I think it's a little more natural to make that sort of mistake, whether you're a native speaker or not, because you know, like continents are just so abstract. They're so big. But anyway, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll go back and try to start explaining what I was explaining before. We have a new comment. What video is this on? It says, "Thanks, you are great." On the video, my new video about the 3 things you need to sound American. Good. Waiting for new whiteboard or markers for my whiteboard. Welcome to the chat, Mr. Nijan. I assume Mr. I could be wrong. Yeah, I don't really know gender based on the the names in your language. But yes, so forgive me if I'm wrong there. But hello, Professor. I accidentally dozed off, woke up in the middle of the night, and realized your stream was on, so here I am. Well, good. I mean, sleep is important, so if you got to get that sleep, get that sleep. But if you would like to be here and join the stream, we are glad to have you. Very nice. Good to see you here. I hope you're well as well. Alexandro Andrade. Probably said that horribly. Hello, everyone. Alex from Brazil. Yay. From Brazil. Another Brazilian. So many Brazilians in the chat. Like, I think every single week since I've started the live streams, we've had like at least one Brazilian at all times. Gabriel, we got Steve. We have lots of different people. I don't even remember off the top of my head, but I know there's lots of Brazilians here. So good, another Brazilian. Welcome to our live stream. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, just hope you're doing well, and thanks for joining us. But anyway, again, people who just got here, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you just want to say hi, that's also cool. Maxim, how come that you learned Python? Okay, it's also not a language question, but that's a good question. So for those of you who don't know, Python is not a human language. Python is a computer programming language. Given the context of this live stream, people might be like, "What's Python?" and then go look up online, what's Python? Yeah, it's a computer language. So that's what I programmed the ear trainer in. The helicopter is kind of loud. Hopefully that doesn't interfere with the audio here, but so various reasons, a couple different reasons. The number one reason, so I have tried to teach myself how to program several times over the last 5 years or so, maybe even longer than that. And it's always been this sort of like love-hate thing where, it's like it's something that I kind of want to learn how to do. It seems interesting, but then I go and I look at these tutorials and I do these resources and, whatever. And it's like I just always end up, how I say it, I always end up banging my head against the keyboard because I can't get it to work. I don't know what's going on. I feel stupid. A very similar experience that a lot of people have from what I hear. And so I would always kind of give up. And so because of that, I did have a little bit of experience trying to explore, right? A common question is like, what's the best or what's the easiest programming language to learn? Which of course we know in terms of easiest, I think that there might be something of an objective answer there, but in terms of best, we know if you know anything about programming, it depends on the project. So with Python, I did some stuff in JavaScript on Free Code Camp. That's what they focus on. I looked at C++ and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think so. I looked at Java and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think so. And Ruby, I did a little bit with Ruby. That's obviously kind of, it's more readable, maybe a little more beginner friendly and stuff. But Python, number one, I do think that overall, generally speaking, it's probably generally the most readable and probably beginner friendly in my particular opinion. And number two, more importantly, so many people, especially beginners who are trying to get into programming, and most people don't realize this until they're like maybe upper intermediate or advanced level, um, which I'm not, but I realize this because of other things. My upside down pyramid meta map for all skills helped me sort of figure this out, as well as my attempts before to sort of try to learn and failing a lot. Um, but the programming is not about code. It's not about code. And people say, well, what do you mean it's not about code? Obviously, like you're programming a computer, you're writing lines of code to tell the computer what to do, programming, right? But programming is not code. Programming, you could describe as the combination of logical thinking with strings of symbols that the computer knows how to interpret, which we would call code. So logic plus code equals programming. Because the computer can only do what you tell it to. It's dumber than dirt. Like computers have zero intelligence, um, and so if it tells you an error, if it's not working, that's because what you told it to do was to give you an error. And it might be because you're missing a punctuation or something. That's not what you intended it to do, but that's what happened, right? It's very brutal. It's like a mirror of reality. It's like it only gives back what you give it. And if there's bugs and stuff, obviously things can get very complicated and whatever. And you're like, why is this happening? I don't know why this is happening, but the computer can really only do what you tell it to. Sometimes maybe you have two pieces of code that conflict. Okay, that maybe be a little more user error, but still, why are they conflicting? It's probably um, something somewhere in the code of something that you told it to do. So I go into all that because Python, I think, is in my opinion, the one language that helps to get the code out of the way, and you can focus a lot more on trying to think logically and organize your control flow. Okay, so what do I have to do? What's the purpose? Like you take your first problem. That's what I did to build the ear trainer. I said, okay, so first I need an interface. So I looked up Python interface because I didn't want to build an interface. Like I know that that's going to involve a lot of math and stuff. I was like, I didn't want to do that. So I found tkinter. I did a tutorial on how to use tkinter to build the interface. And then after that, it's like, okay, how do I get it to show this? Right. And once I have that problem defined, if I don't know, I can go look it up, right? But otherwise, I have to say, okay, so like, especially if it's like an if statement, you're saying, okay, if this, then that, blah, 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 if else, whatever. You have to think that through and think, okay, what's the order? And if you don't get the order right, you may not get the result you want. And so programming is really, at the end of the day, it's about logical thinking and sequential ordering of things to create a desired result to solve the problem at hand. And Python, as I said, it helps to get the code part out of the way to where you can really focus a lot on the logical concepts and the ordering, where if you're writing in like Java or C++, you have this like complex code that is very super strict. You have all this like punctuation and you need this and that and whatever and these curly braces and blah blah blah, and there's so many things that could go wrong in the code where maybe you're right, but there's something wrong in the code that's causing the problem, right? And that's one reason why I would always bang my head against the keyboard, because maybe in JavaScript I was missing a semicolon and it took me half an hour to figure that out. Obviously you can run into similar problems with Python, but because it's more readable and you don't have as many of those issues, the code is less of a problem. So that's the biggest reason why I chose Python, to get the code out of the way and focus on actually learning how to program. And it worked quite well. There are other reasons I like Python. Obviously, it's used in a lot of open source projects. It's used in AI. It's used in all this other stuff. I don't plan to do AI or anything like that, but the fact that it's sort of everywhere is something that I like. I think, obviously, not everything is free, but I think that, in general, like I'm a big supporter of like open source. I'm a big supporter of free software. Not all software has to be free. That's fine, but um, I really think technology should be like an open thing to as many people as possible in general, as like a general guide or idea. And I think Python fits really well with that. But anyway, Theris, do you know if Spanish from Spain has a TH sound? It does, yes. Like the word cora. Cora, well, I don't think that's, I think you mean corazón. Maybe corazón is a word because we have no. That's not even a word in English. Yeah. So maybe it's just a Spanish word I don't know. I don't have my Spanish keyboard installed. So forgive me. I keep forgetting to reinstall that after I had to redo my operating system. Forgive me for not putting the accent on the O, the second O, but it's corazón in Spain. Well, except the south of Spain. The reason why the Spanish, like most of the Spanish speaking world, like in Latin America especially, doesn't have the TH sound is because the south of Spain doesn't have the TH sound. They replace it with an S sound. And a lot of the conquistadores, the people who came and colonized Latin America, um, again, a lot of unfortunate history there, but most of them were from the south of Spain, um, especially the earlier ones. And so that's the accent that was sort of taught. And so that's why, right, most of Spain uses a TH sound for the Z and the C that's not a K sound, like corazón, but the rest of the world generally doesn't do that. Yeah. And it's a voiceless th. They only have a voiceless th. They don't have a voiced one. And it's not. I don't think it's 100% exactly the same as the th in English, but it's a th sound. Like it doesn't. It really doesn't matter. It's kind of like the e. Like the e sound throughout various languages that use it is almost exactly the same, and it's not really that big of a deal most of the time. So it's kind of the same there. It's a th sound. What is the difference between prepositional verbs and phrasal verbs? That's a good question, and I don't think it matters. Um, Prepositional verbs, right? You would expect me to know this as an English teacher, but a lot of the technical terms, I just like if I need to look them up, I'll look them up because I really hate a lot of like technical terminology and stuff because it's not generally useful for me and it's not generally useful for you. If I were a linguist, then they're a bit more useful. But for language learning, a lot of these really technical grammar type terms, they're not particularly useful for you guys. A prepositional verb is an idiomatic expression that combines a verb and a preposition to make a new verb with a distinct meaning. Sounds like a phrasal verb to me. Um, of course, I have a particular definition of phrasal verb, which we can go into as well. But the preposition in a prepositional verb is generally followed by a noun or pronoun, and thus prepositional verbs are transitive. See, all this blah, 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 blah. Okay, so some examples include care for, long for, apply for, approve of, add to, resort to, result in, count on, and deal with. Okay, now this is where I have a problem because, hello, David, and Meadow. Sorry, I'm a little behind in the chat at this point. But yes, welcome everybody. I'm in the middle of answering this, so I'll get back to everybody. I'm going to tell you to look at it this way. See, this is why I explain it this way, and I talk about this in the introduction to the book about prepositions. I don't care what the strict definition of prepositional verb and phrasal verb is. I really don't care, okay? Because it's not useful for you. I framed my question like that because it was the shortest way I could fit it. No, your question is fine. Your question is absolutely 100% fine. There's no problem with that. I'm coming. You sort of you triggered my. Well, okay. Put it simply, you triggered me because this is something that bugs me. Not that you did anything wrong. Yes, I will. It's because of how these things are technically classified and how they're generally taught, and it's very dry and boring and confusing. Who cares if it's a prepositional verb or a phrasal verb? I don't care. Okay. When I use the term phrasal verb, see, if you look up online, what are phrasal verbs? So one example that they listed on that page is care for. So you care for somebody. So I care for him, right? Which is we actually probably more likely use about. Or you can say like I don't really care for it. So like, oh hey, do you eat I don't know, onions? I don't really care for them. I mean, I don't really like them. Now, this is an example, and I'll give you a couple other examples here. Just draw it straight off this page because there were some good ones here. Apply for, approve of, add to. Okay, apply for, approve of, add to. Okay, these are not phrasal verbs. Maybe they're prepositional verbs or whatever. What are they called? Yeah, prepositional verbs. Okay, I don't care. I don't care. There are, when it comes to the combination between a verb and a preposition, okay, there are a couple things that can happen. Number one, certain prepositions, let me rephrase that, certain verbs naturally like to use certain prepositions. And sometimes there's only one answer. Sometimes there's maybe more than one answer, depending on exactly what you're saying. So look at, look up, look over, look through. Okay, but look at is not a phrasal verb. That's just the preposition that normally goes with at by default. And it's based on the logic of at, how at feels. There's a subconscious, root structure of why at naturally goes with look. Same thing with focus on. It's another good one. And we don't have to care about what all those details are here, but it doesn't create a new meaning. It's nothing special. It's just the preposition that links look with the thing that you are looking at. Okay, look at the sky. There's nothing special. It's very basic grammar. Then so all of these would be examples of that. Care for, apply for, approve of, add to, look at, focus on. These are just the prepositions that go with those verbs. By default, normally, in most cases. Maybe there's some other options like apply to. You can apply yourself to your studies. Okay, that's going to be a little bit of a different meaning that you can maybe say it's a bit more of a phrasal verb in a way. Sometimes it's kind of a gray area of what would fit my definition here, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The logic and the feeling still applies in all cases. But what I would generally define as a phrasal verb is where you get a new meaning through the combination of how the verb, like what the verb means and how it feels, and what the preposition means and how it feels. Okay, because at the end of the day, the ultimate thing is verbs have a feeling, prepositions have a feeling, and under the surface, those feelings can combine in order to create new surface meanings. Okay, so even if like look up, okay, look up could be not a phrasal verb if you're meaning it very literally. I say look up. Okay, that's not a phrasal verb. It's look where? Up. All right. In that case, the verb and the preposition aren't even connected. It's look and then where. I could say look to the left, look down, look at that. Okay. These are different things that you can direct the looking with, and so it's look plus up. But we can actually combine up into a phrasal verb, meaning to search for something, like in the dictionary, right? You're going to look for certain information. So, I don't know what the answer is, but I'll look it up. Okay, I'll do a Google search. Now, that particular meaning is the result of a phrasal verb between look and up combined to create a specific meaning. So it's actually, phrasal verbs look like two words, but and technically they are, right? We are combining two words like puzzle pieces, but really they're acting like one unit, and it's almost just like a compound word. So it's almost like this, right? Where if we do this, that doesn't work. It's look at something, okay? Where look up, meaning not up, but to search for something, is just one idea that is created, expressed through two words that come together. And that explanation, some people don't like it, some people find it more confusing. But I think it makes it simpler because when you go and you look up phrasal verbs and they list things like apply for or approve of, like of is not used in phrasal verbs. Okay. Of is like the most simple of bare connectors between two things that doesn't even really have its own inherent meaning. Like obviously there's a logic and a feeling to it, part or content, but as I said, like it really just shows the relationship of something to itself, right? So that's kind of all it really does. It doesn't actually have a special thing like up. Okay, that could be physically up. That could mean have this feeling of completion um, or whatever. There's different surface meanings for that. But hello, Amit. Long time no see. Glad to see you here. Well, hope everything is well. But anyway, I could rant on and on and on and on and on. It doesn't really matter. Uh, but I really hate that when you go and you look for phrasal verbs, you get these things that don't create a new meaning, right? It's just a combination of a plain old verb with a plain old preposition like approve of. And that's just the preposition that goes with approve. Like, okay, that's nothing special. I think phrasal verbs should be used um, to mean creation of a new meaning. Okay. And that makes it a lot easier, a lot less confusing, I think, for English learners, because then if you see something like approve of, you're like, well, what's being created here? What's the meaning? It's like, well, it's nothing. It's just approve of something. um, so anyway, that's my perspective. I could be wrong. Technically speaking, if we're being strictly technical, I am wrong. But I don't care, because what's strictly technically accurate is not always useful. Okay, maybe it can help Portuguese people to learn the sound faster. So okay, so back to the th. It could, yeah. If that's actually common advice I give to Spanish speakers who aren't from Spain. In order to learn the th sound in English, you can mimic, like, because usually like these days, right? We have communications, TV, all this stuff. So a lot of people from Latin America will know what a Spanish accent sounds like, and maybe they can't quite do it, but they'll have an idea of sort of like how to create that sound, like corazón instead of corazón. Um, and so it gives you a little bit of a boost because of that, that Spanish accent from Spain, the Castilian accent. Now, if for Portuguese speakers, if you are also familiar with that, if you have some of that exposure from Spain Spanish or Castilian Spanish, then yeah, you can use that as a benefit. But remember, it's only the voiceless one. English also has a voiced version, which is produced the same physically, except you add the vibration. Okay, so you have to actually do two versions of it in English. Okay, do you have any tips on memorizing words in English? Yes, you can check out my book. There's lots in there. The book about how to learn a language. But I'll give you a couple things. One, using spaced repetition, like in Anki flashcards, is generally like really fantastic because it helps show you the word when you're about to forget it, which is generally like the best way to learn it, and your brain will hold it for longer and longer times until it's in your long-term memory. But not everybody likes using flashcards. Even if you do, you don't have to use them. But that's using some sort of spaced repetition system is generally one really good point that can help a lot. But my biggest tip, see, now you use memorizing words, which is a very normal term. And even myself, I would probably use that word, but I think memorizing isn't the best concept, because if you approach learning vocabulary as memorizing, just like with grammar, if you approach grammar as memorizing, um, you'll have the knowledge of the word. So say like playa means beach, right, in Spanish. Okay, so I'll have the knowledge, like playa means beach. But then when it comes to recognize the word, especially in listening, or to use the word, it's not necessarily going to be there, right? I'll just have that conceptual knowledge. And so obviously the knowledge is tied to the skill, and they're all interconnected, but knowledge is not skill. And so I don't think memorizing is the right concept. Getting used to would be better, right? You don't really learn a language or memorize a language. You get used to a language. I think that's a much better concept for how to approach it. But semantics aside, I think that probably one of the single best general pieces of advice for learning words is usually this is called like learn in phrases, which is definitely true, like because words exist together. Like almost no words exist in isolation in actual speech. Um, but taking that one step further is learn words that not just words that can go together, right? Because you can make tons of different kinds of sentences, right, with all kinds of different combinations of words. But say, for example, like apple, red, round. Okay, those naturally go together to express a particular, say, object. And it doesn't have to be an object necessarily. That's just the example I like to use. Because usually when you go to school, they give you a book, right? And they say, okay, today or this week, we're going to learn fruit. Okay, apple, manzana, orange, naranja, banana. Okay, and then next thing you know, right, a week later or whatever, you're like, was apple manzana or naranja? I don't remember. Okay, because manzana and naranja, they don't mean anything to you. You're just translating them from your language, and you know what those words mean in English. They represent the object known as an apple and an orange. But in Spanish, these are new terms. And so you can use maybe memory hacks, and you can think like, okay, um, like orange, naranja. Okay, there's something kind of similar there that apple and manzana don't have. So you can use a little memory trick there based on the pronunciation, and that's one thing you could do. But even better is instead of trying to learn apple, orange, banana, which are similar categories of things, or cat, dog, bird, similar categories of things, studies show that this will decrease your ability to remember the words because they're in the same category. So your brain will mix them up. What you want to do instead is apple, red, round, bite, chew. Now you get into sentences. I bite the red apple. I chew the red apple. It is crunchy. Okay. Now you're using words that all are based around apple. Okay. This is real language. This is how language works, not apple, orange, banana. Okay. And then you do orange. So you want to learn orange, right? And I'm giving very basic, simple examples here, but okay, now you've practiced with orange now, or with banana, or apple. I'm already getting confused. um, Oranges are not crunchy. Okay. Now you can still chew, right? Anything that you that you eat, you can chew. So you can still use that, but apples are crunchy, oranges are not. So crunchy and orange are not connected in English. They don't go together, okay? An English speaker would never think to use the word crunchy with an orange. It doesn't, it's just, there's no relationship, okay? So now you're thinking soft, maybe juicy, because apples can be juicy too, but oranges are really juicy, right? So you're learning different adjectives related to that thing, right? And then how does an apple feel? An apple is smooth, where an orange, maybe the skin is kind of bumpy. Notice skin also, the skin of an apple, just like the skin of a person. Ah, there you go. Okay. So the skin of an apple is smooth. The skin of an orange is bumpy. Now you're learning bumpy, smooth and bumpy, right? They're opposite words. So you can see how now the language is starting to come to life through these real life things instead of memorizing a list of related words. Okay. So that should be immediately obvious to anybody why that is a vastly superior approach. Um, in fact, I have plans to make a beginner course. I know I mentioned this before, but for anybody who doesn't know, I have plans to make a beginner course here on YouTube, and it's going to include things like that straight from the beginning. Okay, it's going to have the pronunciation, it's going to have that type of vocabulary approach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for beginners. Okay. When I'm going to make that, it's probably going to take a while because I'm trying to get the pronunciation course. I still have the preposition course. I have a book on verbs I want to write. So it's not going to come anytime soon, but I do plan on making that beginner course. And even for intermediate learners who maybe have gone through the traditional educational system, it might be a little slow and boring for you at first, but you'll probably also benefit from that just because of the horrible way languages tend to be taught in schools. Um, I guess it's easier. Sometimes we'll accidentally say more easy. Natives will do that, but it's supposed to be easier. I guess it's easier to learn from a language that is also closer to yours. This specific sound, I mean, yeah. So, uh, yes and no. Yes and no. Actually, the more similar languages are, obviously, it removes a lot of the barriers. So a lot of the problems that might be there are not there, and so it does help a lot. It definitely, I think, has more of a positive benefit than a negative benefit. But because things are so similar, it can also be really, really easy to confuse things. Like maybe both languages have the same exact word, but they mean completely different things in each language. Um, and obviously, that's like a small problem to fix and get used to, but it can cause some problems. And it kind of depends on which languages we're talking about, especially if it's a second and a third, right? So me knowing Spanish, and then if I go to learn Portuguese and I try to get my Portuguese to the same level as my Spanish is rusty at this point. I think it. I got it to a pretty solid point because I can still speak. I can still understand a lot, even though I haven't used it in I haven't really used it very much in say like 2 or 3 years. um, so it definitely got to a pretty solid point. Um, but if I go and I start learning Portuguese, especially without like having any contact with Spanish, and I do that for like 6 months, I'm probably going to start having a lot of interference and problems. So if I go back to Spanish, now all the Portuguese is going to come, right? And that doesn't mean you can't learn two similar languages. I'm just saying that if you're learning two similar languages where one is not your native language, you want to be careful there and make sure that one is very, very solid and deeply ingrained before you start trying to mess with one that's similar. I do have to go to the bathroom really, really quick, so I will be back. But yes, hello, Meadow. I'm doing well. I hope you are too. David says, "Hey, so sorry I haven't got back to you on Patreon yet. A lot been going on. How are you? Hope everyone is having a great day. Yes, and I'll come back after that. I'm doing fine, David. Hope you are as well. No worries about the Patreon. I was kind of wondering because it's been like 7 days. Because I just looked at it today. It was like the 15th, and today's the 22nd, and I was like, huh, a whole week. Anyway, I'll be right back. Okay. So, where were we? Curious Soul. Oh my God, stupid YouTube. Wow, I am way behind. Okay. Okay, I got that. Okay, what is the difference between later and later on? Oh, that's a tough one. Well, so sometimes some words can actually be implied, right? Like a very common basic example, I think he's right. There's actually the word that. I think that he's right, but we don't usually don't say that because we don't need to. Um, Later can mean later on. Like the on could be implied. So that's probably one reason why you have the question. Uh, but strictly speaking, let's see, would there really be any real difference here? Okay, so I would say that they probably mean basically the same thing. Maybe it depends on the context, but off the top of my head, later is later, obviously. Like there's now, there's earlier, right? Like earlier in the day, I got my cup of tea. Now I'm drinking my tea, and later I will finish my tea. Okay, very simple. Later on, the on, remember the part of the uh, so there's for example, a phrasal verb move on, which means, okay, we're talking about this, which it has a couple different meanings, but we're talking about this, say we're talking about pronunciation. But I also want to talk to you about prepositions. So I talk about pronunciation, I talk about it, I talk about it, and I say, okay, well, that's enough about pronunciation. Let's move on to prepositions. So we're going to leave that topic and move to the next topic. Later on kind of feels like that, where it's like you're saying later, right? I could say later on, I'll finish my tea, right? It kind of just maybe makes it a little stronger in a way, or makes it sound like it's not just like a static like later, but it's like the sort of like we're moving forward at a later point, right? So um and again, they're not exactly the same. There's a little bit of a different feeling between them, but they basically mean like the same thing. Yeah. The on just adds a little to it, a little extra, I guess. Again, context is always important. That's off the top of my head. If you have any example sentences specifically, then those are always useful, and I can base it off of that. I have a question about combination from Ahmet. Okay, do you think the vowel here is the first vowel of the diphthong a with the second part, which is I, or is it the canonical dress vowel? Interesting. Hmm. So first, I would say to make sure that you don't have a typo. So you're asking about the like is er, so it's like it would be the er combination. That's what you're asking about, because I don't know who you're learning from or where you're learning the stuff, but those things are in no way related. Like even dress isn't related to like obviously there's an R in dress, but that's the consonant. Um, do you think the vowel here? So the is the vowel. See, this is one reason why you have to focus on your ears and not your eyes. The vowel is commonly written, especially as like a default, like if we say this is the sound and we try to write it, it's commonly written er, but there's no e. Okay, it's not the start of the a diphthong. It's not the sound. There's no e. There's no sound there. It's just Okay, it's just like the consonant. Okay, and The only difference, which depending on the dialect and what you look at, they will show maybe a different symbol for, say, the consonant and the vowel. It's completely unnecessary. Um, it's one of those stupid points that just make things extra complicated. Like there's literally you don't have to make any difference at all between the consonant and the vowel, except that the vowel sound relative to the consonant is going to be slightly longer. So we say run with a consonant, right? Run. It's Where when we say water or power, it doesn't mean that it's a long syllable because it's not stressed in that case. The vowel is usually not stressed. But if I were to say run, that would be the vowel, and it doesn't sound right. So it's just relative to each other. The vowel is slightly longer, same exact sound. Okay, it's not a combination in any way. It's just That's it, a single sound. I might have to make a. I don't know if I could do a whole lesson about that, but I might have to make a short on that because there's other people who might have that same view of things. Okay, curious soul. I'll provide some examples below to make my career more clear. I depend on my family. Correct. Depend on my family. Wait, depend my family on. Incorrect. Prepositional verbs because it can't be separated. Okay. Okay. Take off your clothes. Correct. Take your clothes off. Also correct. These are phrasal verbs because it gives freedom to separate the two parts of the verb. Okay, so if that's the strict definition of prepositional verbs and phrasal verbs, then I suppose maybe that could have a tiny little bit of use. Still not required. Still not very useful. No, as I said, take off your clothes and take your clothes off. Both correct. Okay, I think maybe you meant to say correct because it gives us freedom to separate it. But the first case is true. Yeah, I depend on my family. That is correct. That you have to say it that way. If you say it, I depend my family on, that's not correct. But also notice in this case, depend on is not a phrasal verb, which I guess would fit the definition here, prepositional verb. How I would describe this is that depend and on is just the preposition that depend uses. Okay, and that's why it's not separable because why would you if I say the keys are on the table, why would I put something between keys and on? Because I'm showing the relationship between keys and table. Where are the keys? On the table. Okay, putting something between keys and on would make no sense. There's no reason to do that, because this is just the basic use of on. Depend on my family, same thing. Now, depend on my family is more abstract. We're not talking about a physical relationship, but I described that in the book and also in the video about on. I'm pretty sure I did it in the video, but either way, there's a reason why on is used there, but it's just the basic use of on. Okay, uh, where take off, now we have a special meaning that's created because we're using take and we're using off, which if you think about it very literally, you put these two together, it doesn't make any sense. You can't like take off something. Like what? Like, okay. Like maybe if I say take the keys off the table, okay, now we have a physical relationship. But take your clothes off, like on the surface, how can I take clothes off? Like it seems kind of weird. But the opposite of this, we put clothes on our body. So of course, now instead of using put, right, why don't we use usually the opposite of take is considered either bring or give, depending on what we're talking about. So why don't I give clothes on my body or bring clothes on my body? Because those verbs don't have the right idea, right? We put the clothes, right? The place that they go is on top of the body, the surface of the body. And so it just so happens that in this case, the opposite of put is take, right? Instead of bring or give being the opposite of take. So you combine take and off, and you get this new meaning, which actually, I guess, yeah, it's kind of weird. That's just a really abstract case because put on clothes, it's also abstract. Anyway, see, even me, I'm getting confused trying to talk about this. So normally, but that's actually not completely true because there are things called separable phrasal verbs and inseparable phrasal verbs. And maybe when people talk about inseparable phrasal verbs, they're just talking about prepositional verbs, whatever, I don't know. The point is that I don't think it's a good way to think about it, right? This whole difference between prepositional and phrasal. In fact, phrasal verbs by itself, like that doesn't really seem to really mean anything at all. It's not a useful term to me. Like phrasal verb, what the heck is that? Like a verb used in a phrase? Okay, so that's why the way I approach it, I think it's much better to think about it as there's prepositions that just by default go with certain verbs. It's just what they use. There's nothing special. It just shows the natural relationship. Then there are certain combinations. So actually, now I think about it, take off, I probably wouldn't put as a phrasal verb, um, which is kind of weird. I guess this would be in the gray area. But anyway, again, see, this is why this terminology it's not particularly useful. Think about it as there's some verbs that naturally use certain prepositions. And when you're learning verbs, this is a tip that I got from several polyglots when I was doing research on like how to learn a language for Spanish, um, when I didn't know how to learn a language. And what you'll often hear is that when you learn a verb, don't just learn the verb. Learn any preposition. Don't learn all possible preposition combinations. You don't have to do that because sometimes there's more than one possibility. But many verbs will have a default preposition that tends to go with it. Okay. And especially when you're learning a new language, in English, we say depend on, but in Spanish, they say depender de, which would literally translate to like depend of or maybe depend from. Probably of would be a better literal translation, but it means depend on in English. And so as an English speaker, I would want to say, so yo dependo en mi familia, trying to translate on literally into Spanish. Or if I were a Spanish speaker trying to speak English, I might say, which Spanish speakers do this, I depend of my family, right? And so if you learn in English depend and on together, okay, uh, as a unit, then without a special meaning, it's just the preposition that goes with it. I think that's a better way to think about it. It's like, okay, these go together. Again, maybe there's other options. Like look has a lot of possible options, but the default normal one with no special meaning is at, right? Look at something. And then you have other cases where maybe some of them are kind of gray areas, whatever. But um, usually with what I would call a phrasal verb, there's a very clear creation of meaning. Or in some cases, like with up, there may not actually be like a completely new meaning created, but it can be used as like an emphasizer in a way. So like if I say um, clean your room, I don't need to use a preposition, just clean your room. But if I say clean up your room, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same meaning. It's just up gives it a little extra feeling. Kind of like I was trying to talk about with like later and later on. It gives it a little extra feeling. It gives it sort of a feeling of like completion, like, oh yeah, get it all nice and clean, right? But it's the same meaning. You don't have to use up there. Um, and so, I mean, how would you define that? Because the up isn't even required. It's just sort of being added. And it's like, is that prepositional? Is that phrasal? Is that some other thing? It doesn't matter. Um, and that's another reason why I like the approach of looking at the logic and the feeling of the prepositions, because if you do that, it doesn't matter if something is a phrasal verb or not. It really doesn't. It's is the way that you're using the preposition in combination with a verb, is it a way that a native speaker would naturally use it? Right? That's really what all the grammar is trying to teach you, but it's in a very ineffective, boring, dry way, and often confusing way. So I try to cut through all of that, go all the way around all the technical stuff, and just say, this is how it feels. This is the logical approach that we can use to build that feeling. And then it doesn't really matter because, as I said, I've had students who naturally start to use real phrasal verbs spontaneously that they have never heard before. So I think this is a much better approach, and it doesn't matter if something is prepositional or phrasal. So whatever. That's my opinion. Amit again, should we be worried about which R sound we use? Sponge versus retroflex versus post-alveolar. What the heck is post-alveolar R? Or does it matter that much as long as we don't use the tapped R? We definitely don't want to use the tapped R. Or the trilled R, right? Doesn't exist in English. Does not exist in English. Technically, the flap D is very, very close. You could maybe say from like a Spanish perspective or whatever language, Russian also uses that. Um, it might seem like an R, but in English, we don't think of it as an R. It's a flap D. Um, and you should never use that in place where there should be an R sound. That's the important point. What the heck is a post-alveolar R? Post-alveolar R. With the tongue near or touching the back of the alveolar ridge. Okay, that makes sense. Post-alveolar. Okay, so ra, ra, ra. Is that a type of tapped R? Because I can imagine it as a tap. or maybe it's just where the tongue generally is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What I would say, um, I'm not sure about the post-alveolar because I don't, that's something new to me. I've never even heard of that. But bunched versus retroflex, no, it doesn't matter. It does not matter at all. I use more of a bunched R. The retroflex R is a little bit painful. I don't want to say painful, but it's uncomfortable for my tongue. I can do it. I notice sometimes with the R color sounds, my tongue might do a little bit more of a retroflex sometimes, but I generally use the bunched R. Uh, both of them are perfectly fine as long as you can make a nice, good, solid sound. Obviously, there's a very slight difference in the exact sound between a bunched and a retroflex, but in American English, or I would say even in English in general, that difference in sound is not something that we would recognize. It, as long as it sounds like a good solid sound, it doesn't matter. Okay. So if the pulse alveolar is not a tap and it sounds like a good like it sounds very similar to that, then it should be fine. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. Now I do know that, for example, Mandarin Chinese has a very similar R to English. And I've even heard it described as being the same type of R. Uh, but listening, because I've had some Mandarin speakers as students, and listening to their R sounds, I can tell that it's not the same. It's very similar. It's a very similar type of R, but it's not the same. It's more like, if I can remember how to do this, er, 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 yeah, I can't do it. It's like I don't speak Mandarin. I can't do it. I can't reproduce it. It's in my brain somewhere. But I remember listening and trying to sort of play with it with my student for a second, that it's definitely not exactly the same as the English R. Kind of like how the I sound in English and the I sound in Hindi, even though the IPA symbol is the same, they're not quite the same exact sound. Like they both sound like I, but the Hindi version doesn't sound like English. Okay. Um, so you have to be careful depending on your native language. You might be able to make, say you're bunching it or you're retroflexing it, you might be able to make what does sound like a pretty good solid English like R, but it might not be quite right. So you have to be a little bit careful, get feedback. Um, but generally speaking, if you can do in English and it's nice and a good solid R sound, you should be fine. C, can you speak normal speech and everyday speech with your family, friends? How do you do in informal and very informal conversations? What are these examples? Uh, Well, I do speak normal speech every day. I speak normal speech with everybody, family, friends. I don't have any coworkers, but if I had coworkers, I would speak normally to them. If I had a boss, I would speak normally to him. I don't know. One of the things that you have to know about American English, yes, we do have formality, but it doesn't work the same as other languages. Like, for example, in Spanish, or actually, I would say probably most European languages, especially Western European languages, formality is like baked into the grammar. So, like, there's the informal tú, meaning you, and then there's usted, meaning you formally. Um, where in English, we just have you and you, right? We used to have a difference there, but it sort of just became you. And for that reason, as well as some other reasons, like Americans being generally pretty relaxed and informal as a culture, um, we do have formality in places where we can make things sound more polite and nicer and this and that and whatever. But compared to what you might think would be like, basically, if you would expect something in your language to be formal, there's a good chance that Americans wouldn't speak formally. So, like, say boss to your boss, right? In other countries, other cultures, many different languages, if you're speaking to your boss, you're going to speak formally. You're going to use formal language. Like, your boss is not your friend, and that's true in American English too, and in American culture, your boss is not your friend. That is true. There's a boundary there. Um, and in some cultures, your boss might speak to you informally, but you can't speak informally to your boss. in general, especially in my direct personal experience, having bosses in the past, it depends on the person. It does depend on the person a bit. But in general, um, the type of language that I use can be quite informal. Not necessarily the most informal, using like, all the, most relaxed informal things, but like if you saw an interaction between, say, a boss and an employee at Burger King or something, um, the you might not expect some of the language that is used, because you say, "Oh, that sounds way too informal for this situation." So I don't want to downplay it and say like we never use formal speech or anything like that, or make it seem like we don't really use, like we rarely use formal speech. But relative to your culture, it's very likely that the way that you would probably hear somebody speak on TV, um, well, it's not 100% on TV, but generally speaking, if they're good actors and it's like a situational drama or whatever, the way that people speak is just the way people speak in American English. Like there's not as clear or as strong of a boundary between like formal and informal in American English. Um, so by mean of normal, there's distinction between normal and informal and very informal. Okay, so and I know Ahmet, you have a thing there, but this is related here. To finish that up really quick, so what you mean by normal? So this is how I would categorize it. So there's very formal, which we would pretty much only use in writing. That's like scientific documents or maybe business emails, and things like that, like very formal. Even in business emails, like it doesn't have to be very formal, but um, in everyday speech, like most people would never speak very, very formally under any circumstance. Maybe if they went to see the Queen of England or something. But um, and then there's like sort of like formal, which sometimes we use or whatever, but then there's what I would call standard, which is kind of, I guess, what you're meaning by normal. Um, so I wouldn't call it normal because I think for American English, we tend to spend a lot of time between standard and informal. Okay, sometimes we'll use the formal if we have to, but what I mean by standard is making your speech not sound too overly direct when the situation calls for it. Because informally, you can usually be very, very direct, but sometimes you don't want to be too direct because it'll sound too direct. Or making it sound a little more polite. So can and could is a good example here. Um, let's say that I want to ask you to do something for me. Okay. Now, a really formal way to say it, which sometimes we might use in speech, if we want to make it sound really polite, we would say would, right? Like, oh, would you please open the door? And like you can add or not add please, and the please will make it even sound more polite, right? But if I say, would you please open the door? Okay. Now, the standard politeness would be to use could. Okay. Could you please open the door? Or just could you open the door? Okay. Informally, instead of using could, because remember this could is not past tense of can. It's a different use of could. But informally, I can say, "Can you open the door?" Um, and this is something some English teachers would probably disagree with because like can is an ability, right? It's like whatever, but can actually has several different uses in actual real speech, and one use is an informal request. Can you do this for me, please? Right. Um, so the standard would be could. Sounds perfectly polite. It's not overly formal. It's not informal. It's just could is like it's good for all cases. Okay, formal, informal doesn't matter. It'll work all the time. But if you want to sound a little more informal, you're talking to a friend, you can say can, and that's also perfectly fine. So that's how I would do it. There's sort of like formal, which we kind of use if needed, standard, which we use most of the time, even in situations that are more formal. And then there's informal. And then very informal would be extreme edge cases, like, say, replacing the th with a d instead of a dental d. So if you say, like, oh, that's cool, right? Which it sort of mimics that sort of, I guess that would kind of maybe be sort of ebonics in a way, or like that sort of rapper hip hop type, the way that a lot of those people speak, which is fine, as I've said many times. But in general American English, to most people, that will sound extremely informal and kind of uneducated. So that's the only thing that I would consider to be very informal. Those are extreme cases. So I hope that helps. But I think your original question was maybe something like you want me to speak to you here the way that I normally speak to family and friends, because if that's the case, that's what I'm doing. I'm speaking like a normal American English speaker would speak to pretty much anybody. The only slight difference is that maybe some of my word choices and my some of my word choices might be a little simpler because I know I'm speaking to English learners and I want as many people as possible to understand. Um, which Americans generally tend to use simpler words than not anyway. Um, but also my pronunciation might be a little bit more enunciated than I might normally do in real life. Again, because I'm aware I'm talking to English learners, I'm not clearly super enunciating everything. I'm still linking very normally for the most part. I'm saying sounds very normally for the most part. So this is pretty close to the way that I would normally speak to another person. Of course, it does feel one-sided. I'm sort of like talking to myself in this room, but I am aware that you are listening, and so it's a little artificial in a way, but this is essentially the way that I normally speak. Yeah. Um, and what do you use for ah before N or M? So is man more like, yeah, this is, I really need to make the lesson about this. I have it in my list. I think I need to bump that up because then I could just say go watch that lesson instead of like re-explaining it like 10 times. These are all of my questions that have been in my mind for the last 3 to 4 months. Thanks. Okay, so yeah, this is a common question. As I know very well, it's a very common question. And it's a really stupid question. I'm not saying it's stupid from you for asking the question. I'm saying it's a stupid question because of why the question exists in the first place and why it's complicated. And I had a conversation in a comment thread with somebody, and if I can find that quickly, I would want to link that, but that might take me a second. So I'll just try to re-explain what I did there. But I had this conversation with somebody, and um, there's a couple details here. Okay, there's a couple details. At the end of the day, my position, I know some people will disagree with me. My position is that ah is ah. Okay. When it's before N and M, the exact quality, and remember, when I say quality, I don't use that in the way that, say, Rachel's English would use it. I mean, like, how does the sound exactly sound? So if I do like ah, 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 you can hear there's a little bit of a different sound, but it's still basically ah. Like, we don't recognize it as a separate sound because it's both of them are close enough to the same sound. Um, but the quality would be different because I'm not reproducing exactly the same sound. So before N and M, um, the exact quality of the ah sound does change, but it's still an ah sound. Okay, that's the first point. Now, how does it change? There's a couple details there. Before I get to that, I want to answer this whole schwa thing because I know some people, which you have two variations here, but some people say like, oh, it's like man, which is not eh. Like what some people will do for speaking really lazily, it's possible to do a plus like man. But I actually think that that's not a variation. That's not anything special. That's a consequence of what is physically happening in the mouth. And so let's get all these pieces down. So first, what are the changes without any of the schwa thing going on? what are the changes that make the not the exact same quality as the before N and M? The first thing I would say is that, and this actually I think applies generally to all vowel sounds, but we only really hear it in probably because of its exact positioning and other physical details, but it stands out in for some reason. And what happens when we go to N and from a vowel to N or M is that there's this flap, right? The flap that leads up to your nose. Um, and a lot of the times, right, if somebody is a little bit of a nasally speaker, that'll kind of just generally be slightly open because some of the sound is going through the nose. So we say they're a nasally speaker, and that's okay. But in general, right, English is not supposed to be a particularly nasally language um, as part of the language itself. And so that flap is generally going to be pretty closed. Okay, I would even say probably completely closed, more or less. I guess there's always a little bit of air might go through your nose, but you know, you get what I mean. It's closed. Now, so that means if I say okay, and actually I would say that's why, because since my mouth is so open and the sound is so far forward, even if I just do a regular with, I'm not going to say N or M, like cat, I can already feel that flap starting to open a little tiny bit. It's not completely closed. Okay, so even if I say cat, it's already slightly open because of the position of the sound. But again, for all vowel sounds, when we go to N or M after, what's going to happen is we're preparing to open that flap. It's not a clear, clean, like, okay, there's and then or there's E and then No, as we flow from the vowel into the N or the M, or even the we're preparing. Now, I think the might be different because we're actually closing here and letting it open. So there's already a clear close. I don't know. It might be weird, but M and N for sure. Um, because we're preparing to go into that nasal sound, it starts to get a little loose. Okay, so it's already open, or it's already starting to open. And then when we close into N or M, it's already sort of relaxed, so the sound can just shift easily instead of having to, like, force it open or something. Um, and so because of that, when we do, like, if I do E, for example, and I say, if I say C, 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 okay, the flap is closed. But if I say seen, okay, seen, you can already hear a bit of that nasal in the E. C, seen, C, seen. And I can feel that flap opening through that vowel. Okay, now it's not considered a nasal vowel. It's just in English, it's a byproduct of that flap relaxing in preparation for the N sound. Okay. Um, but it's, as I said, it stands out a lot with because of where is and the mechanics of the mouth with that sound. And so that's the first big point. Okay. When I say at, and that's a nice clear open sound. I could do a lazy one, at, that's fine, but we'll do the nice clear one, at. Now, if I go to N, okay, it's still going to be but now there's going to be a little bit of nasal interference in the quality of the sound because that flap is starting to relax. And, and. It's still It's still It's the same sound. We're just getting this nasal interference. The second point here, which is a bit variable, there's actually something known as, I think it's called raising in American English for the sound. And this is actually on a spectrum. Some speakers do it, some speakers don't. I think most speakers will randomly, anytime they say whether there's an N before it or not, there may be some degree of raising with the back of the tongue. Okay. It's a very dynamic, fluid thing that can happen, but is not required in the language. It's just something Americans do because we get lazy or whatever. But this raising is where the sound is supposed to be here, and the rest of the tongue is kind of like, out of the way. You can't really see the back of my tongue, but Now, if I sort of let this raise up a little bit, at. Okay, that was no raising with raising. You might not have heard a difference there, but there was a difference. Now, if I say and I don't do the raising, an, an. If I do the raising, an, 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 an. There's a little bit of a different sound. Now, because of the combination of preparing to do the nasal for the N, plus the fact that we may or may not raise to whatever degree with the back of the tongue, creates a distortion in the sound that makes a stand out when it's before N or M as a different sound when it's not a different sound. And I can tell you 100% for sure, it's definitely not eh. It's not man, man, man. No, maybe some speakers do that, but no, there's no eh there in any way. There's no eh or the start of a. No, not in any way. Now going back to that schwa, the last little piece there. This makes a lot of sense for N. With M, I think it still makes sense, but think about it. We're going from a all the way down here. This is the top of your mouth. And then we're going to lift the tongue all the way up into N. We're going to pass that schwa. As the tongue sort of relaxes up, it's sort of like the sound is here, and then it sort of relaxes back as we move up into the N. So it's actually very natural, especially if we're lazy and we're not clearly enunciating, to hear a little bit of that schwa sound as we transition up into N. Man, 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 that sucks. So that's possible. There could be a little schwa in there, but it's as a consequence of the physical mechanics of the mouth. Okay, and it's actually not required in any way. You don't have to do that. But if you have a little bit of a schwa there, not as two separate things, not like man, that would be wrong. But if you get a little bit of a schwa in that transition, no problem. Okay. Now with M, like let's say I say ma'am instead, right? Ma'am. So before I close the lips, my tongue is going to start relaxing, and that where the vowel would be placed sort of shifts back with the tongue until we kind of get to that relaxed sound, that neutral position of the schwa. Ma'am, ma'am, ma'am. So it's also perfectly fine, even though the front of your tongue isn't raising. It's perfectly fine to sort of hit a little bit of a schwa as the physical consequence of closing your jaw a bit, moving into the M sound. Okay, but there's not supposed to be a schwa there. So I think that the way that this is usually taught is just a gigantic mess. It's not completely accurate. There's some truth to it here and there, but that's my perspective. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I feel very strongly that a is a. It doesn't change to eh. Maybe there's a schwa, but the reason why it sounds different is because of the interference with what's going on with the nasal flap and the back of the tongue. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I know that was a lot. And I am way behind, guys. Way behind. Okay, I got to try to speed this up, especially since I only have maybe another hour here. All right, so David. So I'm always impressed by your Southern accent. Well, thank you. Well, thank you. And I was wondering if you can share a few tips on what to do to have that characteristic twang as far as vowels go. Honestly, so as I've said before, I do have a bit of talent for pronunciation, which you would think would mean I could very easily do like a British accent and an Australian accent, which I really can't because I haven't actually tried it very much. I can kind of sound proper British if I want to, but the Southern accent, the reason why I can be, and again, there's a variety of Southern accents. So to say the Southern accent, I actually probably mix them here and there a bit, and it's just like a general Southernized American accent. But the reason why I'm able to do that is probably because of country music. Because say with like British English, it's like, okay, I hear British English, I watch Doctor Who or whatever. And so, we get exposed to that, but I don't go around like, trying to speak in a British accent or sing in a British accent. Some British singers do still have a bit of their accent, but I've noticed a lot of British singers, they at least to me, they almost kind of lose part of their accent and sound American. Like there's a band I was obsessed with when I was 10 called S Club 7, and I didn't know they were from Britain. but apparently they are. And they had a TV show that was kind of popular for a couple years here in the States. Um, and then I heard their British accents, and I was like, they're British? Like, I had no idea based on how they sing. I thought they were American. And so even if I sing based on a British person, I may not be practicing any of like the British pronunciation. Where in a Southern accent, there are some Southern, like say country music singers that maybe they're not even from the South, maybe they are, that don't have that Southern accent. But generally, even like people who don't normally have a Southern accent, if they go to speak country music, they'll take on that Southern accent, right? Because it's a common thing in country music. And so I think it's because I have a lot of actual practice singing country music, singing along with singers, that has sort of, in addition to just general exposure to the accent as an American native, um, that I'm able to reproduce it fairly well. Um, I would really have to think about it because it's not something I really thought about. It's just something that I tried to imitate through singing. Um, but I would say that it kind of sounds maybe a little more lazy in a way, a little more like slack jaw, a little more kind of rounded in some cases. So if I say, and say, I'm from the South. I'm from the South. It's a little tighter. I'm from the South. I'm from the South. I'm from the South. I come from, see, I don't know. I come from Tennessee, 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 Tennessee. Okay. Um, and so just move in that direction. That's all I can say. Like, I'm not here to teach a Southern accent. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to think about it. Also, is the Western cot merger present in Southern folks as well? When you speak Southern, what do you do? Words like fault, dog, and wrong. It's a good question. I've never thought about that. But the cot merger, I don't think it's part of the Southern accents. Maybe in some Southern accents or in the way some people speak, it could be. Since the cot merger for the last 40 plus years has been moving eastward across the country, and now more and more people naturally use it. Um, I wouldn't be surprised if there are Southern speakers who have developed it. I don't know for sure. Okay. But if I were to say these words in my Southern accent, which again, it's probably not perfect to any specific Southern accent, but if I were to try to say these, I would say fault. So normally or fault, right? This is fault, 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 fault. So I get a little bit more rounding in there. It's very close, very similar. Or dog, dog instead of dog, dog. Now I'm adding the lips and sort of adding like an almost like an ooh to it. Dog. I'm making a diphthong. Dog. Yeah, go get your dogs. Get your dogs. Okay. Or wrong. That's just wrong. Same thing. Dog wrong. That's just wrong. With fault, fault, fault. Maybe that sounds okay, but I wouldn't want to naturally do the same type of thing that I would for dog and wrong. And it might be because of the L, because of the L color. Um, and sort of keeping it a little more open in a way. But yeah, dog wrong. You did me wrong, Cletus. Come back. Anyway, I don't know. What is the exact position of L and TD sound? Does the tip of the tongue? Okay, so does the tongue tip? There we go. Does the tongue tip of TD sound in the middle of the alveolar or in front? Okay, good question. So there's a little bit of wiggle room for the exact. It's not necessarily a pinpoint perfect position for really any sound, but what you generally want to do, right? So for the T and D, as I talked about in the lesson for T and D, front teeth here, okay, top of your mouth, right behind your teeth. There's this little bump, okay. This is the top of your mouth, okay. For those of you who know, I guess it's the alveolar ridge or whatever. It doesn't matter, or the alveolar palate. I don't care about technical terms, but then there's this part of your mouth that goes up and back. Okay, so we're teeth, bump, up and back. Okay, now you don't want to be back here, and you don't want to be on the teeth. No touching the teeth. Okay, don't even get close to the teeth. okay, for the T and D. Okay, you want to be, there's that bump, you want to be either on the bump, maybe slightly behind it, maybe slightly in front of it, but nowhere near the teeth, nowhere near this part that starts to go up. Okay, so it's basically on that bump. Now that's a normal T or D. If we do a flap D, that can be a little bit different. It depends on the sound after it. We have different ways that we can do it. It's a different topic, but just normal T and D, whether it's strong or weak, or even in the stop position, we're going to go on that bump. Okay. Now, the one other detail about the T and D, it's not straight up. Okay. If you try to do that and just use the very tip of your tongue, it's going to be like ta, da, ta, da. It's not how we do it. Okay. It doesn't go straight up. On the opposite end, it shouldn't be so flat like this, where it's like da, da, ta, da. Nope. Okay. So you want to go up, touch that bump, okay, right on the bump. Nice solid connection, but you want the tip to not be completely flat as it's up here. You want it to be very slightly flat. Okay, not even like the whole front. It shouldn't even be like that, so it's not like flat like that. It's just a little bit of flatness. Very little bit of flatness to where it's not just the tip itself. T, d, t, d. Okay? If you can get that ratio just right between, somewhere in here on the bump, not too far forward, not too far back, and then get the tip of your tongue not too pointed and not too flat, you get those two things together, perfect T and D. Okay. For the L has a bit of a range for the exact placement. The easiest way that you can do the L is just do it here. Just put it flat on the teeth. La 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 la. Okay, but in reality, now this is for the full L, not the half L, the light L as it's called, a normal L sound. In reality, we don't always do that. It might be up here, right, where maybe we're just kind of touching the teeth a little bit, and there's some flatness. Again, you don't want to be going like this. That's like a Spanish L. La 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 la. Okay, you want to be a little bit flat, but you want to be touching the teeth. La 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 la. So here I'm flat in the front, just a little flat, kind of like the T and D, maybe a little bit more flat, but I'm touching the teeth. Okay, and then of course I'm not pushing out, I'm just pulling the tongue off. La la la. So anywhere from that, where it's slightly touching the teeth with a little bit of flatness, all the way to completely on the teeth. La 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 la. And you even see when I put it flat on the teeth, a little bit of the tongue might kind of stick out a little. La la. And in fact, the end of that range would be when we really emphasize or we say a regular L super, super clearly. You can actually stick the tongue between the teeth like a really clear TH sound and say la, la. I love that. Okay, so that would be the full range of the L sound. There's not just one answer. Anywhere from there to there to there is a perfectly good fine L sound. It's just that the one between the teeth is usually only used in very clearly enunciated or emphasized words. So there is that. Maxim, what's the difference between in time and on time? It's such a question. Okay. Yes, let's say we have a meeting at 2 p.m. If I came at 1:50 p.m., would that mean I came in time or on time? Okay. I talked about this in the Logic of Prepositions book, and it's also in the lesson about the logic of the preposition on. I have this exact question that I answer. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's in that lesson because I remember doing that. I remember making that. Anyway, but it's definitely in the book. It should also be in that lesson if you go and watch it. But the short, simple answer. So there's a hidden connection with at here. Okay. So yes, you have a meeting at 2. So at 2. Okay, that's the specific time. If you go past that time, you're late, right? So that's easy. Past, late. So 2 is the point in time. Now, if you take that point and you think of it as, right, say you have a timeline. 2 o'clock, 2 p.m., and you have a dot. Okay. Now, what happens if you take that dot, you zoom into it, and you turn it this way? Now, it's like a platform, it's a surface that you can arrive on. 2 p.m. I arrived at this time. Now I am on that point in time. Okay. So if you are on time, you are quite literally on the time of 2 p.m. Okay, that's why we say on time. When I explain it that way, it seems very abstract and a little bit weird, but under the surface, that is what is happening in the subconscious. Okay, that's why we say at 2 p.m. and on time, specifically on time for that meaning. In time is similar, but it means something different. In time means, I like to use the example of an airplane, okay? So let's say instead of a meeting, let's say your plane leaves at 2 p.m. You arrive, it doesn't matter. As long as it's not after 2 p.m. Let's say they want you to be there at 1:50 to make sure you get on the plane. Okay, so after that would be late, right? But let's say that you're supposed to be there at 1:50, the plane leaves at 2, and you don't get there until maybe 1:55, 1:58, or even say 2:05. If the plane has not left between 1:50 and 2:05, as long as the plane has not left for whatever reason, either because it's not supposed to leave yet or because it's running late, right? And it just hasn't left yet for whatever reason, you are in time, meaning that it is not too late. You can still get on the plane. Okay. So on time means you are there when you are supposed to be because you have arrived on that point in time. In time means that maybe you're late, but you're not too late because whatever it is hasn't started yet. Okay. And we use in because in, which is the next lesson I'm making, and it's going very, very slowly and painfully. I apologize. But in is a container. It's always in some way a container. And so the reason we use in is because there's any time before the action happens, like the plane leaving or the meeting starting, any time before that to any time that it starts. So maybe it's supposed to start at a particular time, but they start late. Okay. As long as, even if the specific time that they're supposed to start doesn't happen, as long as you get there before it starts, you are in the container of being not too late. Maybe you're early, maybe you're there just at the right time when it starts, but you're not too late. Okay, that would be outside of the container. So I hope that makes sense. Davin, and what about words like ran, van, or ham in the Southern Twang? Okay, so yeah, I like this one. This is actually where we might get a lot more of a schwa sound, all right, in the Southern accent. So like ran, I ran and ran and ran, okay, or van, get in the van, get in the van. We gonna go, we gonna leave, okay, or ham. Can you pass me another piece of ham? Piece of ham, ham. Okay, so yeah, it's a bit of a different sound. If I'm not wrong, on time is coming at 2 p.m. Yes, that is correct, as I said. Is the D in day in at the end of the day articulated in a slightly different way than when the word is on its own? Um, okay. Day, 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 at the end of the day, at the end of the day, 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 at the end of the day. I would say no. If anything, because of the speed and the fact that we're flowing from a sound before it to the sound after it, it might actually technically be very slightly softer. But it doesn't sound any stronger to me. It doesn't really sound any different. Like it's the same thing. I think this question might come from the fact that it's pretty common in this phrase. We don't just say like at the end of the day, blah 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 blah. Right? We say, well, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, uh, and I'm focusing on the D for some reason. You might also be asking about the vowel there. Uh, in that particular phrase, that word tends to get a little more emphasis than it normally would. And it's also at the end of a chunk. If we write it, we'd probably put a comma there, right? So there's also an intonation thing going on. So day is d plus a. If I very clearly say it, day, day, day. Okay, but remember, we often cut diphthongs, which could mean all the way from completely dropping the second part to just partially going into the second part. So I could say day, 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 and it's fast and quick. If I hold it, it's not going to sound right because now I'm trying to clearly enunciate half a diphthong, and we never do that. Okay, because it's faster, it's lazier. That's the purpose of cutting the diphthong. So if I say at the end of the day, at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it sounds a little weird there because normally, again, in this phrase, we tend to emphasize it more. We tend to maybe enunciate it a bit more because of where it is and all that stuff, as I said. So we won't tend to cut the diphthong. Actually, I would say we wouldn't cut the diphthong at all there. And we're going to use more of that clearly articulated form. So maybe that's why it sounds a little different to you, because normally when we say day, we don't clearly articulate it. We tend to either partially or completely cut the diphthong. In the FT ending cluster, it's common to drop, no ed there, to drop the T in it, right? So would you link the F to a vowel if it's the next, I added a word there. Oh yeah, if its next word begins to a vowel. So if the next word begins in a vowel. Example, the word soft and. So in the FT ending cluster, it is common, yes. And remember, when we're talking about American English pronunciation, especially what happens between words, there's very rarely, if ever, something that has to happen, and there's very commonly multiple things that can happen. Okay, so, and it's very dynamic. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on your speed. It depends on how clearly you're trying to push out a particular word for whatever reason. The chunks influence it as well. Your intonation influences it as well, et cetera, et cetera. It's really complicated, but basically, yes, it's common to drop the T after the F. So if I say, oh, it's really soft, soft, soft. Now I might kind of go up into like a held stop T just because my mouth is already closing. That's fine. But if I say soft and, okay, soft fan, instead of closing up into the T at the end of soft, if that were like the last word, we don't have to say the T there. Okay, and the and, of course, could reduce to say in or un. So it's, if I say it's soft and cuddly, right? It's soft and cuddly, soften, cuddly, soften, cuddly. Even the word this is the verb to soften, meaning to make something softer, more soft. That T in softer is different, okay, because it's actually connected to the after it. We are going to say that T. But see, as I said, it's dynamic, right? It depends. But in soften, you can say soften if you're enunciating with the T, or we just commonly drop the T and connect to the n, soften, soften. And we can say soft and exactly the same, soften. It's soft and cuddly. Okay. Or I need to soften my pillow. That's the verb. I need to soften my pillow. It's soft and cuddly. Exactly the same pronunciation. Or with soft and, I can say it's soften, soften. It's going to get sort of that little bit more like, almost sounds kind of like a D type sound, because it wants to kind of become a D as it connects to the vowel. So there's multiple answers, but yes, you could drop the T. You could drop the T. And it's a common thing to do. And link the F instead. Well, that was quick. Oh, that was lightning speed. Oh, it's probably when I went to the bathroom. People always say that. Like, I don't think I go to the bathroom very fast. But okay. And yeah, I know I'd like, or I can't read. I know I'd asked you this before, but just again, do the K and T, P and T in ending consonant clusters, KT or PT could be aspirated. Okay. Yes, they can be aspirated. Are they going to be aspirated? Probably not. That definitely wouldn't be at the start of a stressed syllable, right? And this, remember, it's arranged. The fully enunciated form would be the strong version of a stop consonant. So k, t, p. Okay. If it's and that happens at the start of a stressed syllable, right? Because that's, and especially if you're speaking really clearly and emphasizing time, kiss, park. Okay, it's going to be nice and strong. But anywhere in the word, it could be in the middle, it could be at the start of an unstressed syllable, it could be in at the end of the word. Okay. The only case I would say that this doesn't apply is maybe if it's linking to a vowel, because we want to keep it nice and soft in those cases. But at pretty much any time, you can potentially aspirate it. Okay, if you have a special reason to do so. Like I just said, okay, aspirate, aspirate. So that P is at the start of an unstressed syllable. It's aspirate. Okay, but I could say aspirate. You have to aspirate it. Okay, it sounds kind of weird in normal speech, but if I really want to emphasize and say, hey, no, you're not understanding, you have to aspirate it, I can give a little bit more force to that because it's a special case. Okay, so potentially, depending, anytime you see a K or a T, it could potentially be aspirated. The question is it likely to be aspirated? Is it normally going to be aspirated? And if it's not at the start of a stressed syllable, no. Okay, especially if it's in a cluster like this. So if I say backed, it's not backed, or see, I have to really aspirate the T if I do that, but it's not backed. Like, if anything, the T might be aspirated if I'm really clearly enunciating. But that K, any aspiration that would go to the K is just going to leak into the T. Or if I say popped, I'm not going to say popped. That's extremely unnecessary, unnatural, uncomfortable. There's no reason to aspirate that at all. So the short answer, the easy answer would be no. But it is technically possible. Likewise, I see this before, but one more time. If the T in honest gets pronounced, would it be pronounced like AD? But not really AD, it's a T, just sounds like it. Yeah, so I'm getting quite a few questions about this. I'm going to make a lesson about this in the future. Again, it goes back to everything I was just saying, just like with soft down. It works exactly like soft down. Notice I said soft down, soft down. It can be a D sound. It can come out as a D sound. The thing is, so I don't think that this is supposed to be a D. Okay, it is supposed to be a T. But number one, it's a weak or soft T. Okay, and because it wants to connect over to a vowel, if we're linking in American English, a T that does that wants to become a D. Okay, it doesn't have a vowel sound before it, but usually, right, it'll become a flat D if there were the two vowel sounds and it's connecting over to a vowel. So if there's not the two vowel sounds, there's just the one vowel sound after, it still wants to become a D in American English. And so I do think that there's a little bit of a difference in the actual sound between if you would call it a T or a D. But regardless, it does sound very much like a D, and you could probably do a weak D, and it doesn't actually matter. Okay, this is something that I've sort of thought a lot about over the last few months, and I've very slightly changed my position on it. And I think the easier way I'm going to start teaching this is like you can do a weak D and it's fine, right? It may not necessarily always be that, like it might just be a weak T, but it's going to sound like a D anyway, and so whatever, it doesn't matter. Just don't make it a strong D, like soft Dan cuddly, like the strong D is not going to work. Now here with honest, so you're not asking about linking, we're just talking about honest, right? So if the T is pronounced, right, because as I said, we'll commonly drop the T in the ST ending, honest. You can maybe do a held T there, but it's not required. If, let's say, oh, like be honest, okay, and I actually pronounce the T, okay, and you say, would it be pronounced like a D? So again, if it's linking, it's going to sound like a D, fine, whatever. If it's just the last sound, no. there's no reason for it to be a D. We're not going to say honest, 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 be honest, honest. No, it's honest, honest. If you pronounce the T, it's a T. No, like care. Okay, so going back to that. Oh, I see. Okay, so in that case, yes, that would be the third vowel sound, the monophthong. Could it be the start of the diphthong a? Yes, it's possible. It really doesn't matter. The simple way that I teach it is just it's the third vowel going into the vowel sound, and they just blend. Okay, because it's just nice and simple that way. But you will hear natives also do it where we're not doing ayer, right? Where it's like a full into a plus Um, although depending on the word, I mean, some speakers might do that. But if you don't do the full diphthong, you just do the start of a or a, right? And you do, let's see, care, care. So if I do the monophthong, like in bet, right? Care, air, care, perfectly fine. If I use the start of the diphthong a and don't do the second part of it, care, also sounds perfectly fine. They both sound fine. There is a very slight different quality between them. They don't sound 100% the same, but they sound so similar to each other, especially in the flow of speech, it doesn't matter. And it could be that maybe some speakers from some parts of the country use the start of the diphthong, other speakers use um, but nobody would really notice a difference. It doesn't matter. And occasionally maybe it'll stand out a little bit if they get a little too loose with the A and start going a little bit up into A before they blend it or whatever. Maybe they're emphasizing like, I don't care. See, if we really emphasize the word, maybe we can get a little bit more of the diphthong as a form of emphasis, right? I don't care. That's possible. But normally I don't care. I don't care. Whether I'm using the start of the diphthong or not, yeah, it's just nice and simple. So yeah, it would be with the way I teach it. But it doesn't matter. And why do I hear natives stop the K in KT or the G in GD with or without linking? You have to give me examples of that because that doesn't make any sense to me. Also, the S in these words, princess and horse, can't be Z sound when links to a vowel. No, because they're S sounds. S doesn't change into a Z when it links to a vowel. Like that's not a rule. So if I say the princess wanted to leave, okay, the princess, well, that's a W. You can still connect S and W, but the princess wanted. Or if I say the princess ate all the cake, okay, the princess ate all the cake. The princess ate all the cake. Horse, okay, the plural of horse is horses, so there's a Z at the end of that, but the original S is still an S, horses. If I say the horse ate all the cake, right? The horse ate all the cake. The horse ate all the cake. If we get really lazy, maybe there could be a tiny little bit of a Z that creeps in, but no, there's not supposed to be a Z sound there. Like, we definitely don't think of it that way, and there's not supposed to be a Z. So no, the answer would be no for that. But for the other question, I have no idea what you mean. You have to give me some examples. Because that doesn't make any sense to me. Like I understand what you're asking. It's just the K and the G stopping in those positions before a T or a D. I would need some examples because maybe it does, and I'm just not thinking of those examples. But that shouldn't happen. Off the top of my head, it just doesn't exist. So if you can give me some examples, I can talk more about that. Speaking for myself here, but when we ESL speakers, I wouldn't put commas there. I know that's a writing thing, but it's just when we ESL speakers. That's it. When we ESL speakers. I guess you could, when we ESL speakers, type If that's how you're thinking of it, then the commas are okay, but you don't have to put commas there. Type ER. We don't mean the sound in her. Usually we think plus because the vowel corresponds to the E in our. Yeah, I know. It's horrible. It's stupid. This for the sound, this is like one of the very, very few points where the IPA is like actually beneficial. Because the way that we represent this sound is with two letters, where like if I write well, I mean, yeah, okay, so like and ah, obviously we're putting a silent H on one and a silent W on another, but a lot of the individual vowel sounds we put a silent H after, which is just a convention in English if we try to spell it phonetically. But we know it's a silent H, right? And so it's just like a placeholder. It says, okay, it's this sound. And then if there's something else that's not a silent H or like something else that's not after, like O is just the letter O, okay, it's an O. Or if it's oo with nothing after, it's the oo instead of right? So we use the silent H or not silent H to differentiate like which one it should be. And then of course, in the case of ah, we already have AH for so we do AW for ah. But with it looks like it's actually two put together, right? It's the one that sort of stands out. And so having an IPA symbol that looks completely different than English for this particular sound could actually be useful. But that's why I try to be very clear and adamant that it's just like it's not blending of anything. It's just an sound. Don't trust your eyes. Focus on your ears. It's one sound, right? So I should have written in the IPA. Oh man, yeah. That particular, yeah. So again, because you wrote er, see, because when we English speakers think of unlike you English learners, we don't think of it as plus we think of it as because that's how we would try to write that sound in English, and how it's very commonly spelled in words anyway. So I think this is just a switch up because of the fact that we use two letters for that sound in English. But anyway, yeah. So the IPA does have some uses, but generally I don't like it. I don't think it's very useful. Sorry, in both cases, when it comes to the second example, it's correct. Okay, yes, I figured that was a typo. Finn is here, yay! I was gonna try to answer your question that you had recently, Finn, but I'm almost to you. Just hang on. I have less than a half hour, guys. We gotta sort of like stop the questions because I'm so far behind now. How do you link SKS, SPS, STS, how to pronounce and reduce MPTS? So I've talked about SKS, SPS, and even STS multiple times. I even talked about SKS and SPS earlier in this live stream, so you can go back. It's somewhere near the beginning within probably like the first 20 minutes or so. I'm not going to explain that again and again and again and again and again. I've explained it a lot. How to pronounce and reduce MPTS. I don't think that ever happens. Can you give me an example of a word that has, oh, okay, I see. So like attempts. Yeah. Okay. See, there's a reason why I was thinking that doesn't exist, and it's because of how English works. Remember, English does not like multiple consonant sounds together. Two consonant sounds together is fine as a consonant cluster. We really don't like three or more. And this is a rare case where we actually have four. What will happen in the case of three is that if you fully enunciate the word, you would say all of them, right? Like bankruptcy. Okay. But usually, most of the time, we don't fully enunciate it, and we're going to drop that middle sound, and we're going to say bankruptcy. So it goes P to S instead of PTS. In this case, we have four. We're going to apply the same thing. So now there's no middle because there's four sounds. It doesn't matter. We're going to ignore the first one, and we're going to say PTS. Okay, so you can fully enunciate attempts. Okay, that's fine. Or you can say attempts. Drop the T. Attempts. I've made many attempts at that. Attempts. Could we do it with the T instead? Many attempts. No, because the M and the P are already in the same position. So you drop the T if you reduce it. And that's how we will say it like 99% of the time. We're going to drop that T. Okay, where was I? Exactly, that's what happened to me as well. When you try to logically put a verb form like take off into either of the categories, it doesn't fit. Yeah, see, so again, so thank you. By the way, there are many more of these weird sets. I know, it's a big mess. The only thing that I haven't been able to solve yet is how to remember or better feel which phrasal verbs are separable and which ones are not. I really don't have an answer for that, unfortunately, because the logic doesn't seem to address that. It seems to be a random thing, and it might not be random. I want to take a closer look at it at some point. But throughout the entire process of the book and even up to this point, going through and making the videos, I haven't come up with an answer for that. So that is one of the unfortunate details that you kind of just have to memorize if it's separable or not. So yeah. No, I meant the approximate. See, I don't even know what we're talking about. So the approximate of or air? I don't know. I'm so confused now. Or was that the alveolar thing with the R? I don't know. I'm not sure what you mean by approximate now. I kind of lost the reference there. Again, another anal retentive question about versus the first part of the face diphthong. Yeah, I got that much at this point. What do you think you use for before ng, as in bank, ring, or tank? Well, what I use is not there are speakers who will use there. They'll say bank, rang, tank, which is very uncomfortable for me to do. So a lot of speakers, especially Western speakers, will replace the here when it goes to the whether or not there's a K in addition to it. We'll replace it with the A diphthong. And so here you're asking basically like, okay, should it be the A diphthong? Or so you're actually asking if it should be the first part of the A diphthong or if it should be the third vowel sound. My answer would be it's the A diphthong. It's the full diphthong. But remember, we can cut the diphthong. So we may not actually pronounce the full diphthong. We might get lazy and we might just use the first part of it. It is definitely not as in the like bet, the individual sound, the third vowel. So we don't say bank, 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 rang, rang, tank, tank. I guess I can imagine some people saying that might be like a really lazy way to say it, like an even lazier way than cutting the diphthong. So I guess it's okay now that I hear it. I guess it's okay. I definitely wouldn't think of it that way. Because that seems strange on the surface, but the sound it comes out okay. So you could do very lazily, bank. You could do the start of A and say bank, 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 bank. Or you can do the full A, bank, bank. I'm going to the bank. You rang. Is the tank full? Okay. But I would say probably generally the most common for the speakers who do use that instead of would probably just be the cut diphthong. But anyway, can I confirm something with you? I just want to know if I'm hearing things properly. If you look up Lady Gaga The Curiosity a cappella, I don't hear any R sounds in arms. Arms, yeah. At 7 seconds to 17 seconds. Okay, well, 7 and 17. Okay, so Lady Gaga, I'm just copying this. That's the easiest thing to do. Bam. YouTube. Tuba, tuba, tuba. Okay, 7 seconds. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, so the way that she's speaking, I don't know if I assume Lady Gaga's American. I don't know. um, maybe she's not. Uh, she's also dropping the R in tired. She's saying tired, tired, tired. Um, it kind of makes it sound a little bit southernish in a way because not all Southerners use the R's, or a little bit British in a way. But some singers do that. And I most commonly hear that probably from British singers if they don't sound more American when they sing. But yes, you're absolutely correct. She's not saying the R in arms. She's saying it like in the British way, arms. Yeah, in my arms, something like that. Good ears. Then in can't find the cure, she says, "Cure. I just closed it. I just closed it." All right, we're running out of time, guys. I got like 15 minutes left. 40 seconds. But when she repeats the word later, the more open. Okay, this is a good point. So it sounds a lot like the unmerged rounded aw. Okay, 57102. And there is going to be a reason for that. Why did you not load? 30 seconds. Okay, so I'm hearing like, I mean, it doesn't sound like cure like I would say. It sounds kind of like an ooh, like cure, which is one way to say cure. That's perfectly fine. And then what was the other timestamp? 57 and 102. 57. Okay, yeah, 57. She says it more with an O sound than like cure instead of cure. And then, see, I can't remember anything. 102. Yeah, I think the one at 102 is like literally just like they took the audio and repeated it, so it's going to sound the same. Yeah, so some words have multiple pronunciations, and that's fine. Usually, these are things like data and data, where like it doesn't matter how you say it. Other times, it tends to be a bit regional, but it's not necessarily what's the best word here? It's not necessarily impossible, even within a particular region, to hear some of the other variations. Because remember, American English is a spectrum, and most of it will generally sound neutral. So the word cure, the way I say it is cure, cure, cure. Okay, it's just It's Y plus a sound. There's no ooh, there's no o. It's just Okay. Um, but how some people say it in American English would be cure, cure, or maybe even cure. Now, actually, I think probably actually the only time I've ever heard cure would be maybe from more of a Southern speaker. So that actually sounds kind of Southern to me. Um, Probably with the R, but maybe even without the R. If it's without the R, it's going to start sounding a lot more British usually, like the actual R at the end. If you just say kyo, that's definitely not right. It would be that sort of British like kyo instead of cure. But yeah, she does say it two different ways. And I would say that's within the boundaries of normal American speech. Cure is one of those words where I would say like usually people from certain regions will tend to usually say it one particular way, but as I said, it's not impossible for it to be pronounced one of the other ways. Like say sure. Sure is another good example. I just say sure. Some people say sure. Some people say sure. Um, I would probably never say the other two. I would just say sure. But maybe one day, you know, my friend asked me something, I say, you know what? Sure, let's do that. I might happen to choose to say it that way. There's nothing wrong with that. It's fine. Um, so again, lots of variation. It's kind of dynamic. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Also, what is she doing with the vowel in song 114? Sounds more like a diphthong to me. And remember, we're also talking about music here, and music is, in my opinion, not the best source of pronunciation because of strange things that happen in music. But let's see, 114. Yeah, that one. See, that's actually a pretty common thing to do in music, in both British and American English. Instead of saying we're saying song, song, song. We're adding a little bit of an O to it almost. In your song, song. It actually sounds kind of southern in a way because they would say song, song, like sing me a song, sing me a song. But that's a little bit more. There's a little bit more going on there. Um, so that it's because of music. It's because she's singing. That's all. I apologize for a loaded question request. No problem. You are a member. You have that green color on your name and the nice little symbol. You are a member. You get special attention. Sorry, everybody, but members got to get special attention because they're helping to support the channel directly. So that's what it is. Become a member. Anyway, you don't have to. That's fine. Finn. Okay, pronouncing smoothly is so hard, which is ironic because it's the word smooth. It's not hard. It's smooth. What are you talking about? Yeah. So the th to l combination. That's a cluster that can be difficult. That's right. I need to. I need to write down a list of consonant clusters and then group them for some lessons. But I forgot to write down. Oh yeah, that's right. I do have sound clusters written down here, but I'm gonna add this here. Th plus l. These are some of the ones we don't tend to think about as much, like PL or whatever those, or PR. Those are common ones that get asked about, but TH to L, that can be difficult. But smooth, so it's a voice th, smooth. And remember, it depends on how you do the th. Okay, first, again, anytime you have a consonant cluster, or really any combination of sounds, it doesn't have to be a consonant cluster, but especially for consonant clusters, the thing you have to remember is you want to be able to do the first sound by itself really well, and then you want to be able to do the second sound by itself really well, and then preferably also in some words, right? That'd be a bit better. But if you can't do the sounds by themselves, you have no business trying to put them together. Don't even worry about it yet. If you can do the sounds by themselves, then sometimes it just happens to be that going from the position of one sound to the position of another sound causes some interference, like L plus vowel sounds. L commonly interferes with the creation of vowels. So maybe you can say perfectly fine, but you put an L in front of it and you say laugh, and all of a sudden now your doesn't sound very good because of the transition from L to it's common, it can happen. In which case, you can do both sounds fine. You need to practice the transition itself and make sure that the first part still sounds good, the second part still sounds good, but pay very close attention to what your tongue is doing in between and really slow it down. That's how you deal with moving from sound to sound, especially consonant clusters. Okay. So, and I mentioned that especially because, as I was explaining earlier, the L doesn't just have one static position, it has a whole range. It could be between the teeth, which we don't usually do. It could be flat on the teeth. It could be up here, just kind of barely touching the teeth with a little bit flat. Anywhere in there is a good L. Okay. The TH is actually very similar. The TH could be between the teeth. That's how you're usually taught. That's not the way we normally do it. Because that's the nice, super clear, enunciated, like emphasized th, like that, right? We might do that in that case. But the reality of the th is that usually we'll either do the dental T or D variation, smoothly, which you could do here. Or we're going to be right behind the teeth. I talk about this in the th lesson. It's a little bit complicated with the exact details of the tongue, but you're going to be right behind the teeth, very, very close, anywhere behind the teeth. It could be right here, right? It could be As long as you're anywhere behind the teeth and you're super, super close and you have the right shape, it'll produce a th sound. So there's a range, and then actually you can actually be a little farther back, not too far back, but that's like a really lazy th. So if I say like smooth, it's almost just like it's like it's just voice in this case since it's a voice th. But it has to be just close enough to where we kind of hear a shadow of a th. That's the really lazy th, and I wouldn't worry too much about that. But that's another way to do it. So there's this whole range of how to do it. And when we go any given time that we do a th sound, it could be any of those. It doesn't matter. Okay. Anytime we do an L, it could be any of those. It doesn't matter. What will often affect it is the sounds before and after it, right? Because say if you're doing if you do a clear th and a clear L, smoothly. See, all you really have to do for the L is just bring the front in smoothly. That might be an easy way to do it. It sounds very clearly enunciated, so it's probably not the way we're normally going to do it, but that's sort of an easier way that you can try to do that. If I were to say this very naturally, smoothly, what I'm feeling that I do is I bring the tongue up here towards the, so I'm not down here, as like up in here towards the top of the teeth on the inside. And I'm really close to the teeth, so I'm making it zzz, and then that puts me in position to just quickly close to do the L, where if I were, say, here, I have to come all the way up here. So the fact that the th can be made anywhere behind these top teeth here gives us a lot of flexibility for moving into the next sound. And so if I don't do a dental D here, which is another way to do it, I'm going to be very close up here and then just close into the L. Remember that with the L, the sides of the tongue come in. Okay, so that's another thing that you got to make sure your L is good for. But that's how I would describe that. And I can't pronounce the th in wealth. Okay, we'll come back to that. Why is the American accent so much more simple than the Australian or North London accent? I don't really know. That's a good question. I think, as I was explaining earlier, American English compared to a lot of other cultures and a lot of other languages, based on my experience, American English is quite informal. Doesn't mean that we're completely informal, of course, but as a culture, we tend to be more informal. And we also have a lot of laziness in our speech. Like the more that I think about the sounds and I explore the sounds and I pay attention to how I speak and how other people speak, I'm noticing that there's like lazy versions of the th, the ah. Like we cut diphthongs in half, and so it's like a lazy version of the diphthong. And so we tend to kind of gravitate towards this. There's also a lot of schwa reductions going on and stuff. And because we solidly pronounce all of our R's, it's a nice, good sound instead of like in British English, London, I assume, is like RP, received pronunciation. But in standard British English, they'll say like, instead of or, they say o, right? Or instead of water, they say water. And so it can actually be a little more complicated because if it's it's right? You just maybe have to blend it with some other sounds, but there's always a solid there. And so I don't know. There's probably a lot of various reasons of why it seems a lot simpler than other pronunciations, but that's what I would say. We're lazy, basically, in our speech. And again, that's part of why I'm here is a lot of teachers will teach just like the really clear, enunciated way because they want to focus on your communication, which is good. But if you want to sound like a native, if you want to sound natural, right? Of course, there's variation within native speech, that's fine. But you have to learn the way people actually speak and include some of like these lazy sounds so you can speak faster and more easily. to really master an American accent instead of just always clearly enunciating things and speaking very, very properly and concisely. And this just sounds like it's too much, way too much. Okay, nobody speaks like that. So anyway, and I can't pronounce the th in wealthy and healthy because of the L. And then Tristan says it's an F sound. So for some speakers, so Tristan, and I've lived on an English speaking country, in an English speaking country, good correction, yes. So I assume you're a native, Tristan, or if not, maybe it's like a second language that you've grown up with. But either way, in the speech of some people, so in I know that in say Cockney British English, and then also in I don't know if I want to call it like straight Ebonics, but there are some speakers who tend to be more African American. I don't think I've ever really heard like a white person do that, which is fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But like I've had friends who were African American and they do that. They replace it with an H. So they say bathroom, healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And that again, there's nothing wrong with that. But in general American, the way that the majority of Americans would speak, it's not an F sound. It is a th. It's a voiceless th in this case. Wealthy, wealthy, and then healthy, same thing. Except wealthy goes well, and then healthy, hell. So it's just the W or the H at the beginning. That's going to be different. But it's an L-colored third vowel, eh. Okay, so you're actually not doing. If you clearly enunciate it, you can bring the L up into a full L and say wealthy, healthy. But the easier way is actually we don't usually do that. We'll do the half L, what's commonly called the dark L, ul, okay, and we'll color the and we'll say well, I'm not bringing my tongue up. Wealthy. So the tip of my tongue never closes for that L. Makes it a lot easier. C, yeah, but it's the unvoiced th. Look at the dictionary. I don't know what that's referencing. Oh, I see. Referring to Tristan. Yeah, so if that's the way Tristan speaks, that's perfectly fine. There are speakers who speak that way. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Again, from a general American perspective, that's not the way that most Americans would speak. I think that's more of like a dialectable thing. So yeah, again, the way I teach, you guys can speak however you want. You can adopt whatever you want, whether it's regional or not, but you have to be aware of how from the perspective of a general American speaker, how it would sound, like if it would sound like it's regional or if it would sound informal or whatever. So as long as you have that information, you can do whatever you want. But are you from the UK? I know some speakers in London substitute an F for unvoiced th and say free instead of three. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think it's in the Cockney dialect they do that. There's probably other dialects that do it too. Although with three, I think there's also some British speakers who say tree instead. Although actually, no, that sounds Irish actually. Yeah, because Irish speakers, I think, replace the voiceless th with the T sound, and so three would become tree or tree. Anyway, whatever. That's not American English. We don't care. Thank you for all the great feedback, and I love new videos. I'll be finishing my Patreon reply soon, so stay tuned. Yeah, I'm sure it's a big novel. Goodbye, everyone. Okay, bye, David. If you're still here, waiting for my goodbye. Now you can leave. And we're out of time, so I'm going to answer this last question. Wow, that went fast. What's with the high schwa plus L? Okay, very good question. Culture has the stressed schwa, but pull doesn't. Okay. I'm actually going to be making a whole lesson about this, and I referenced this in the ear trainer walkthrough video, so you can find the answer there if you want, but I'll just explain it here really quick. this is another reason why I hate the IPA. And even if the IPA is not at fault here, it's unnecessarily complicated. Okay, I'm gonna tell you this: if you go to my ear trainer and you open it, you install it and you open it, you're going to find that in the L-colored vowel section, right? So I write the schwa, right? Whether it's upside down V or the upside down E, it doesn't matter. Remember, I call them both the schwa. Um, and then I transcribe the high schwa as UUH. Okay. In the L-colored section, you will not see either of those. You'll see them in the individual vowel section, but you will not see them in the L-colored section. You also won't see them in the R-colored section. And the reason you don't see them in the R-colored section is, number one, I don't think there is an R-colored high schwa. If there is, then you can just completely ignore it. I do know that, for example, in hurry, some people will say hurry and color that R. You don't have to do that to sound natural and neutral. That's just one variation within the spectrum of neutral sounding general American accents. And I don't do that. I say hurry, it's just okay, hurry. So for the R colored sounds, you don't have to worry about these, the or the For the L colored sounds, you also don't have to worry about these because, so you said culture. Okay, culture. Which I didn't spell it right. Culture. Okay. So the L color combinations, it uses what I call the half L, which is usually called the dark L, right? Okay, so it's going to be ol. That's the dark L, ol. Now, you never, ever have to say ol, going from schwa to ol. You never have to do that. Okay, some speakers do that. You don't have to sound natural and neutral. It's not required. What you can do anytime there's supposed to be an L-colored schwa or L-colored high schwa, you can completely ignore those sounds and just do a half L. This is one reason why I say that the half L or dark L is a vowel. It's not a perfect vowel because there are a couple ways where it doesn't work exactly the same as a vowel, but 90% it works exactly like a vowel. And inside the mouth, physically, mechanically, it basically is a vowel with how we create it. So in culture, I go from k to o. Okay, culture. I'm not saying culture or culture, something like that. Cul. If I say pull, same thing. So now I'm going from p to the half L. Pull. Okay. Now there's going to be maybe a slight different. There you might be able to notice a very minor slight differences in sound if your ears are really good. But that's just because as I release that K, there's going to be a little bit of interference moving into it, where with the P, I'm already in the sound. So that's the only reason why there might be a tiny bit difference, but we wouldn't really notice that. Same thing if I say people. Okay, people, people, not people. You could say people if you want. It doesn't matter. Okay, so anytime that there's supposed to be or I don't even right, where it's L-colored schwa or L-colored high schwa, as I call it, you can just do the half L, the dark L. Why would they transcribe it differently, though? Probably okay, well, I really have to go. I want to finish this up. Okay, so we have Sylvia here, and we have Finn off to finish up. Talking to grammar, how can practice verb tenses? I have a big problem. I tend to mix. Any suggestions? Okay, so no more questions, guys, because I'm already over time, and I have to finish this up. No more questions. I'll answer Sylvia's question here and finish up with Finn, and then we got to go. For Sylvia, talking about grammar, how can we practice the verb tenses? So there are a number of different ways. One way that I would recommend, I actually have a book, and I'm not just saying this for you to go buy the book. You could probably find exercises like this online somewhere. Point of view stories. Point of view stories. I have a whole book. It's aimed at intermediate learners who probably like they have the grammar. They know the simple present, the simple past, the simple future, and the present perfect because it focuses on those four. but you have difficulties using them, right? They don't come out in speech, or you get them kind of confused. And it deals with the automatic responses. So you'll have it's like there's a story. You listen to the story. It's in, say, the present tense, and then you have a bunch of questions and exercises where sometimes you have to change the sentence to a question. Sometimes you have to answer the question, positive or negative. But you only have, okay, you have the book. So for everybody else, you only have like 3 seconds to answer. So it's about quickly responding. So if that's not solving your problem, maybe you have a slightly different problem. Because I assume you've looked at the book and played with it, tried it. If you just do it a little bit, it's probably not going to help you a lot. Like, you should go through the whole book, or at least the whole Black Cat story, if nothing else, which I also have here on YouTube. Um, so other than that, the thing about verbs, so I wrote The Logic of English Prepositions, and I know verbs work the same way. And I know tenses are kind of tied into that. So when I write the verb book, which I will do in probably the medium term future, not soon, but I don't want to, I want to get to it relatively soon. I'm also going to try to include information about tenses, but tenses are very difficult because, say, for example, like you can use the simple present to talk about what, if I remember right, it's called like the narrative present or something like that, where you're talking about, oh no, the narrative past. I forget the exact term, but you can use the simple present in the past to tell a story, right? So you can say, it's 1999. Everybody is at the party and waiting for the new year. Okay. That's a function of the present tense in English. It's an advanced thing that you probably won't learn as a beginner, but it exists in English. Um, some languages don't have tenses, like Japanese doesn't have a future tense. Okay. Um, many languages don't have the perfect tenses, right? Many European languages do, but many other languages don't. So, and even say like in German, German has the perfect tenses, but they tend to only use, they use like the present perfect as the form of the simple past in speech, and then they'll use the simple past as the form of the simple past in writing. So languages are different with the exact way that they use tenses. Obviously, we're talking about English here, but the point of that is it's complicated. Um, it depends partially on what language you're coming from and how your language uses tenses, um, and then the language that you're learning and how it uses tenses. And it's a process. It's going to take some time. Honestly, I don't have a quick, easy, good answer for this problem, because I haven't completely explored it yet, in a way where I can come up with like a good solution for it. So, general advice: pay very close attention to how natives are using the language. Uh, I mean, yeah, I don't really have much of a good answer here, unfortunately. But if you go through that book, even if you can answer the questions, like it's not too difficult for you, but it's still like, a good exercise for you, still getting benefit from it. Just going through that, it can, I think maybe if you do it enough, it can help to start build a little bit of a feeling for the tenses just through repetition. Um, so other than that, speaking practice, making the mistakes. You have to get your hands dirty when you're learning any skill, especially a language. Even if you're speaking to yourself, that's fine. But feedback is obviously very useful. So go to italki, find an informal tutor, a language exchange partner if you can, whatever. Try to practice speaking, try making mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. So this is general advice. But okay, so for Finn, why would they transcribe it differently? So last question here before we go. I think that so I don't know if you've seen my lesson. Maybe I mentioned this before because I know you were here last week. I don't know if you've seen my lesson on why American English doesn't just have one neutral accent. Um, we actually have a spectrum of neutral accents, and as I talked about in that video, the standard that either is taught to ESL learners, um, and also the standard that is taught to native speakers who do have a regional accent, like say from the South, that they want to get rid of. The same standard is used for both cases, for natives and non-natives. And this standard is based on sort of an outdated way that people used to speak in the movies. And it's based partially on British English, just adapted to the sounds of American English. And it has this whole big history. And it's basically the result is a neutral sounding, partially fake American accent. Okay. And if you learn this way, which is how the dictionaries are transcribed using the IPA, and it's how most other English teachers will teach you using the IPA and all this stuff. If you learn that way, you will sound neutral, right? And you will still sound natural as far as using those sounds if you can do those sounds correctly in the right places. Um, but it's a partially fake accent based on history. It's actually that there's that version. The reason I say it's partially fake is because there's actually no American native speakers who naturally speak that exact accent. Okay. Um, Maybe there's a couple here or there. I don't know, but it's based on my research, and it seems that there's actually no natives who actually do that. But it still sounds neutral, right? That's the main thing. It'll sound neutral and natural. And again, it's because we have this spectrum of what would sound neutral. And if you go and you look up, say on Wikipedia, for example, say Western American English, most speakers from Western American English would be perceived as sounding neutral, even though we have certain differences in the sounds, like the cot-cod merger, we're still generally perceived as sounding neutral. So this sort of like middle of the country neutral accent sound is a myth, especially because there's actually a lot of people in the middle of the country who, especially as you start moving a bit south, like say southern Missouri into like Arkansas and stuff, they start to develop, or Oklahoma. There's some speakers who sound neutral. There's some speakers who start having a little bit of an accent. And so it's kind of a myth that like, oh, this is the American accent that's neutral, right? The way that I speak is neutral. The way that I'm teaching you is based 99% off the way I speak, plus some hacks that will still allow you to sound completely natural and neutral. This thing I'm talking about with the schwa or high schwa to the L, that's part of how I speak. So I think that's why they transcribe it that way, because they needed to create some out of this whole sort of spectrum of neutral sounding American accents. They had to create something that they could point to and say, this is the answer. This is the neutral American accent, right? Because otherwise they're, it's like, okay, well, yeah, some people speak this way, some people speak that way, which I have to reference from time to time when you guys have some questions. So I understand why they would want just like one solidified thing that they could point to and say, everybody teaches the standard. But as I said, there's not really any natives that speak that exact standard. Okay. So again, my channel is teaching you guys real English as it's spoken by natives. Yes, the exact way that I pronounce some things or certain sounds that I use is going to be a little bit different than the way somebody from Ohio says it. But if I go to Ohio, I talk to them, they talk to me. It's extremely high odds that neither of us are going to know where the other person is from. Okay. That we're just going to sound American. All right. So, anyway, yeah, that's why. Long story short, this is one of the things that gets me kind of energized. So I had to kind of come down from that. But anyway, we are done today. So I hope that answers your questions, Finn. And I hope it makes things simpler for you, because that is my goal. But if you guys have any other questions or whatever, you can post them in the comments after the stream, and I'll try to get to those. Of course, we'll be back next week, also on Thursday. The exact time might vary a little bit, but it'll be sometime around noon in California on Thursdays. So Next week, I think I'm actually going to start at 11 a.m. So thank you guys very, very much for coming and having helping us create a very productive stream today. I will see you guys next time, and take care.